Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Howard, Mayor of Redwood City, and I want to thank you all for tuning in to our virtual City Council meeting tonight, February 22nd. We continue to follow public health guidance to avoid the spread of COVID-19. As a reminder, items will be taken in the order they are listed on the agenda. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly go over the public comment procedures for the meeting. All public comment on the consent calendar, matters of council interest, and items not on tonight's agenda will be taken at one time during item number 5. Comments on other agenda items will be taken only when that item is called. You may raise your raise hand feature on Zoom to speak. If you're joining the teleconference by phone, you may raise your hand by dialing *9 and *6 to unmute your microphone when prompted. Please only raise your hand at the time that the item on which you are speaking is called. The allotted time for public comment may be adjusted if there are a large number of speakers. Council members Aguirre, Espinoza Garnica, G, Reddy, and Smith, Vice Mayor Hale, and myself will participate by teleconference pursuant to Governor Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20. The City Council chambers will not be open to the public. The meeting is being broadcast live to Redwood City residents on Astound Broadband Cable Channel 26 and Comcast Cable Channel 27, AT&T UVerse Channel 99, and are streamed live via the city's website at www.redwoodcity.org. As a reminder, we are now enabling video when City Council members, city staff, and guest presenters are speaking. We ask for your patience with any technical difficulties as we transition to this new meeting format. I'd now like to ask the city clerk if she would call the roll, please.
Good evening. Councilmember Aguirre.
Here.
Councilmember Espinoza Garnica.
Here.
Councilmember G.
Here.
Councilmember Reddy.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hale.
Here.
And Mayor Howard.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aguilar. And before we start our meeting this evening, I wanted to mention that today, about 3 p.m., President Biden asked our nation to take a moment of silence to honor the 500,000 people who have died from COVID-19 since the beginning of this pandemic. Also, you may have noticed that our American flag is flying at half-mast today at the request of President Biden. The President stated that we needed to show our respect and honor the lives we have lost, and we can do that by continuing to wear our mask, practice social distancing, and take the vaccination when offered. So now I would like to ask you for a moment of silence to remember and honor those we have lost in our community and throughout our country during this difficult time. Thank you all very much. I would now like to ask our council member, Michael Smith, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Council Member Smith. We're now moving on to item number 4, presentations and acknowledgements. I'd like to say at this time, anyone from the public who would like to speak to our proclamations this evening, you can raise your hand when we get to item number 5, public comment. Our first proclamation is item 4, proclamation recognizing Black History Month. Tonight, we are deeply honored to present a proclamation recognizing Black History Month, which is celebrated during the month of February. We are also very excited that the members of the Sequoia High School Black Student Union have joined us to accept the proclamation. Student and BSU Black Student Union President Paris Carr and faculty Taja Henderson and Adili Skillen, thank you all for being here this evening. I'd like to read some, not all, of the proclamation. Whereas African American culture has been a crucial element of the history of the United States, deserving of respect, honor, and gratitude. And whereas Black History Month also creates a specific opportunity for all people in Redwood City to reflect on and celebrate the historic and current accomplishments of African American people, both nationally and locally. And whereas the Sequoia Union High School Black Student Union has provided a space of support and care for Black students and celebrated Black accomplishments through the Sequoia Union High School District's African American Baccalaureate Ceremony. And whereas Taja Henderson and Adili Skillen have faithfully supported the Black Student Union for 25 years, coordinating the BSU activities, connecting youth to supportive people and opportunities in the Redwood City community, and improving the lives of African American and all children. And whereas the Sequoia Black Student Union represents voices of a next generation of Black leaders in our Redwood City community whose aspirations and perspectives must be part of planning for our collective future. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Diane Howard, Mayor of Redwood City, on behalf of the City Council and the people of Redwood City, do hereby proclaim February 2021 as Black History Month in Redwood City and encourage all residents to observe this month in honor of the history made by Black Americans and continue our efforts to create a community that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous for all. I'd like to now turn it over to the Student Union President, Paris Carr, and I will ask her to make some comments, and then Taja and Adili if they have any additional comments. Paris?
Thank you, Mayor Howard and the City of Redwood City for this proclamation. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paris Carr. I'm the BSU president this year. The Black Student Union of Sequoia High School is grateful for this honor. What Black History Month means to me is seeing how for centuries people were dehumanized and overcame many challenges. Our BSU is a safe, open-minded place where the youth gets to express their personal experiences and challenge and how they overcame them. I'm fascinated by the historical excellence Mr. Skillen and Ms. Henderson have been teaching our BSU all year round. And during Black History Month, they give us a chance to flip it and teach others of our greatest accomplishments. Black history is everyone's history.
Thank you so much, Paris. I'd like to ask if Taja or Adili would like to make any additional comments.
I'd just like to thank the city again of Redwood City for this proclamation and what great honor it is to be here and receive this proclamation. I also want to give the deepest respect and honor to my co-partner, Ms. Henderson, and for all the students that we've had and all the students that we will have. We are just so grateful of you.
Thank you so much. We are so pleased you're here tonight. Thank you for coming and continue your good work. Now we move on to 4B, which is the Welcoming Star Award, the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo. Tonight, we are also presenting the Welcoming Star Award to the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo. Stacy Hover from the Legal Aid Society has joined us tonight to receive this award. And I will now turn it over to Jenny Costello from Welcoming Redwood City to give an overview of the Welcoming Star program. Jenny?
Thank you very much, Mayor Howard and Vice Mayor, council members, city staff, and community members. I joined Welcoming Redwood City at its inception to represent Kenyatta College and especially the ESL department at Kenyatta College. The English as a Second Language, or ESL program at Kenyatta College prepares immigrant and international students to achieve their academic, vocational, and personal goals. Now retired, I continue to serve on the steering committee of Welcoming Redwood City. The Welcoming Star Award is given by Welcoming Redwood City, which is a working group of Redwood City Together, formerly known as Redwood City 2020. Welcoming Redwood City builds empathy, understanding, and supportive action across social divides such as race, class, and immigration status to create a welcoming environment for all in Redwood City and North Fair Oaks. As a member of the Redwood City Steering Committee, Welcoming Redwood City Steering Committee, I am happy to introduce our first Welcoming Star Award of 2021. The Welcoming Star Award recognizes programs in the Redwood City and North Fair Oaks community that create a welcoming environment, including treating everyone who lives in, works in, studies in, and visits Redwood City and North Fair Oaks with inclusion, understanding, and respect. The Welcoming Star Award shines a light on what is working with the hope that others will follow suit. The Welcoming Star Award is given 4 times per year, and recipients are recognized publicly at the Redwood City City Council and other meetings in Redwood City, North Fair Oaks, and in San Mateo County. Tonight, we are honoring the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo, and I will pass it now to Mayor Diane Howard to present the award.
Mayor, you are on mute. You can unmute.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you. I'd like to now give you a little history of Legal Aid. Legal Aid of San Mateo Counties, their mission is to fight social injustice through civil legal advocacy for people living in poverty. They have a long history of working with the Fair Oaks Community Center to offer housing rights clinics and assistance to help residents obtain government benefits like Social Security, SSI, Medi-Cal, and CalFresh food stamps. Legal Aid of San Mateo County seeks to remove barriers related to poverty, disability, race, language, age, gender, sexual orientation, and immigration status through the community education, legal representation, systemic advocacy, and collaboration with community partners. They strive to create areas for community organizations to work with government institutions so that every resident has the basic necessities of life, including safe, affordable housing, access to health care, economic security, secure immigration status, and appropriate education, and freedom from violence and abuse. I'd now like to ask the award recipient, Stacy Hoover, if she would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor Howard. Thanks also to Ms. Castillo and to the City Council members. We're very honored to be recognized as a Welcoming Star. As you noted, we have worked closely with Fair Oaks Community Center for many years. In addition, our Libre project has partnered with Redwood City Together to ensure that immigrant families living in Redwood City and North Fair Oaks have accurate information about safety net benefits and how they affect their immigration options. And the strength of our partnership really shows in our ability to adapt to changing community needs. We've been working since early in the pandemic to get information out about the San Mateo County Immigrant Relief Fund. And now we're working closely again with Redwood City Together to advocate for equitable access for our immigrant community to COVID-19 vaccines. This is a strong and thriving partnership, and we're really grateful to be part of this community. And we thank you again for this honor.
Thank you, Ms. Hoover. Now, we always ask Welcoming Star recipients to share a tangible way that people in the community can take action and support their efforts. You'll see on the screen, you can donate to Legal Aid San Mateo County by visiting www.legalaidsmc.org/donate, and you can volunteer, especially if you're a paralegal, attorney, or bilingual, at www.legalaidSMC.org/volunteering. I want to thank you, Legal Aid, for the wonderful work that you do in our community, and keep up the great work. Thank you for coming this evening. And now, item 4C. We have a lot of good news to celebrate this evening. A proclamation recognizing Sequoia Union High School District Board member, Georgia Jack. For our final presentation this evening, we are recognizing a former member of the Sequoia Union High School District Board, Georgia Jack, who is also a longtime resident and active volunteer for Redwood City Schools. It is our pleasure to present the following proclamation for her many years of service to our community. I will read some, but not all. Whereas Georgia Jack served on the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Trustees from 2015 to 2020, and whereas her board service was preceded by many years of active volunteer service, including 2 years as president of the Redwood City Education Foundation and 2 years chairing a music fundraising committee for the Redwood City Education Foundation. And whereas Georgia Jack has served on numerous committees in both the Redwood City and Sequoia Union High School districts, including committee participation on the recent parcel tax initiatives for the Redwood City Elementary School District. And whereas Georgia Jack has worked in nonprofit development and fundraising since 1990 and has held development positions at the St. Vincent de Paul Society, San Francisco Catholic Archdiocese, the Peninsula Humane Society, Planned Parenthood of Austin, Texas, and the Children's Health Council, Palo Alto. She has been a staff member with Stanford University's Office of Development since 2001. Georgia Jack is a member of the South San Mateo County League of Women Voters, the Dem Femmes Silicon Valley, and the Redwood City Women's Club. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Diane Howard, Mayor of Redwood City, on behalf of the City Council and the people of Redwood City, do hereby congratulate Georgia Jack upon her leaving the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Trustees and wish her the best of luck in her new endeavors. Georgia, it's a pleasure to have you here this evening so that we may thank you and honor you. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mayor Howard. I would actually. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for this lovely proclamation that makes me feel like I should just go and retire. And I would love to do that. But I also want to thank all of you, all of the members of the City Council, for all of your hard work during these particularly challenging times. It's not easy right now to be an elected official, and I really appreciate all of your hard work. And I am so delighted to have been on the same agenda with representatives from the high school district and from Welcome Redwood City and Legal Aid. It is absolutely the perfect placement, and I greatly appreciate it. And I am delighted that my family, who are in Spokane, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, and right here in Redwood City, all joined us as well. So thank you so much. I am doing work right now with the League of Women Voters. We are doing outreach around climate change. We are doing a very focused meeting for North Fair Oaks and East Palo Alto and Bellhaven. And I will be sure to send you all the information when that becomes available for that public discussion.
Thank you, Georgia. I look forward to seeing your report. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations on all the free time you will not have because you'll be on to many other endeavors in the future. Moving on to item number 5, the public comment on the consent calendar and on items not on the agenda. At this time, we will take public comment on items that are on the consent calendar, on matters of council interest, and on items not on the agenda. If you wish to make public comment at this time, please click the raise hand button on Zoom to be recognized by our city clerk. If you're joining by phone, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when prompted to speak. In order to see how many speakers we have this evening for general public comment, I'd like to ask that everyone who wishes to speak on a consent calendar item, matters of council interest, or an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand now. I will now turn it over to the city clerk, Pamela Aguilar, to identify the speakers and the last speaker and call names for public comment. Ms. Aguilar?
Thank you, Mayor Howard. We'll give members of the public maybe just a little bit more time to raise your hands. Okay. Mayor Howard, at this time, we have 5 members of the public raising their hand to be recognized. The last speaker is B. Beekman. And after Mr. Okay, there's 6. Let me give it a couple more seconds. Please raise your hand now if you wish to speak for public comment. Okay, Mayor Howard, we have 6 speakers. The last speaker is Baraka Floyd. And after the last speaker, we won't take any live public comment. Anybody who wishes to submit public comment can email your public comments to the City Council at council@redwoodcity.org. And I just want to confirm with the mayor the time limit for each speaker.
Ms. Aguilar, we'll give each speaker 3 minutes to speak, and I believe you'll call 2 names at a time.
I will.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
You're welcome. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. I will call names in the order that hands were raised, 2 at a time. The timer will begin when you begin speaking. And it's okay for your comments to be brief, and it's okay to state that you agree with another speaker. First, we'll start with Allison Madden, followed by Shawnice Stevenson. Go ahead, Allison.
Oh, hi, thanks. I didn't see the timer start.
No problem.
Thank you. Good evening. And I'd like to say that I really appreciate the proclamations. I looked at the packet and I didn't see them expressly set out, but I just wanted to say I very much support the dedication of the month of February, of course, as Black History Month. And I'd like to use the word inclusion, maybe in future proclamations, because it's history that is the history of the United States and should always have been included. But we are where we are right now, and I really appreciate it and think it was great that the students were there to receive that honor of that proclamation. I also want to say, and I'm sorry to say something negative, I think it's wonderful to give the Guiding Star Award to the Legal Aid Society, but I want to point out right now that the city is actually evicting people from Dogtown, and specifically at the Supreme Court of California is advocating against something that would be of statewide benefit to all tenants in the state of California, and that is the Delta Imports motion on the motion to quash. And it's very important. It's submitted and argued and pending, and it really never needed to go that far. And I certainly hope it comes down on the side of the tenants. I think Shirley Gibson is wonderful over there, and I don't know the executive director who just accepted the award, but I think it's great. But I just want to say it's in parallel with these other things that are going on, and I think people should know that and think about that. And I had actually intended to request this 3 minutes public comments to talk about an item that was, on the public hearing last week as 8A. I attended for public comments and also, last meeting, both public comments and the entire very lengthy Sequoia issue. And then I had technical problems and couldn't speak on 8A. But this is where the city vacated a right-of-way on Maple Street and did a land swap. And in concept, I'm not opposed to the land swap because everything about the development I like. And I like the direct extension of Blomquist as well. I just wanted to call out, there is a very long discussion on Nextdoor about the whole area over there and a city-county land swap and what it will do to the shelter. It was started by GERD, and he came over today and I showed him the area, the huge side lot that is not able to be swapped because it's not in city ownership. And I gave him what I called the bird's eye view, a tour of Docktown. And I sent emails today to Ms. Aguilar to include in the public record about what's going on in terms of the legal fight and this particular.
Thank you, Allison, very much.
Thank you.
Next is Shawnice Stevenson, followed by Concerned for Redwood City.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Happy Black History Month. I'm so excited that the Sequoia High School Black Student Union was recognized for all their work. They have just been a dynamic group of young people and leaders who are helping to address racism in our community, as well as bring attention to racism as a public health issue, but also the social justice project for vape stops here. My Black culture is filled with music and dance and beauty and uniqueness, but decades the tobacco industry has regularly used popular African-American culture as a way to boost sales. They pour millions of dollars into targeted marketing campaigns to African-American youth and other youth of color in potentially deadly addiction to tobacco. They have misappropriated our culture to attract a new generation of tobacco users. Often these marketing and tobacco products encourage African Americans by using menthol to make it easier to smoke cigarettes, and flavoring continues to be the attractor for vaping, which resulted in the epidemic among youth. Lastly, flavoring continues to be the tactic to attract a new generation of tobacco users. Tobacco use is an epidemic in the African American community and a leading preventable cause of death. Yet the most preventable, I want to underline that. Let's learn about from our history around health inequities and protect the health of our youth by restricting sales of flavored tobacco in our physical retail stores. I do have a support letter from Sequoia Health District, and you all has many other support letters from other organizations around the area. So join us in the work that the Black Student Union is doing around this social justice issue of their times. Thank you so much, and we appreciate the recognition of what Sequoia High School District is doing and with their young people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Next is Concerned for Redwood City, followed by Chris Johnson.
Mayor Howard, City Council members, City Manager Stevenson Diaz, and the audience. Not a day has gone by since this nation signed the Declaration of Independence for white people. Have Black people failed to make their incredibly difficult, physically exhausting, and enthusiastic contribution to the culture and economic success of these United States. Every month is Black History Month. Every month of school should be taught Black history, accomplishments, achievements, and contributions to the success of this nation. This evening, the City Council will propose holding the 2021 budget study sessions open to the public, providing for public participation. I'm changing topic. Missing, not mentioned, and not likely even thought about is a study session on the most expensive budget item in this city. The roughly 30% of the millions of dollars that go into the police budget. The study session should explore details line by line, rationale, and possible alterations, reductions to the police budget so that you save enough money to hire 2 additional mental health clinicians to join the 3rd added already. such that the community can experience wellness services not 9 to 5, but 24/7. Such services should be provided with the intent, not just a lens, to racial equity. And that equity should be available early and often, Monday, noon, and night. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Johnson, followed by B. Beekman.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Chris Johnson, and I'm a resident of Redwood City. I'd like to begin by offering congrats to Georgia Jack on her well-deserved recognition this evening. After the last City Council meeting on the Transit District in Sequoia Station, I'm a bit dismayed. The lack of significant pushback on 1.25 million square feet of office space and the implications it would have on affordable housing in our community is truly shocking. I recognize there was no decision to be made at that meeting, but nothing I heard indicated there were serious concerns by the majority of you about the incredible amount of office space being proposed in what will be a post-COVID world. In fact, I did witness verbal gymnastics on how 1.25 million square feet of office is necessary in order to afford all the amenities of this project. I have little reason to believe this project is going to go through a major revision based on what I heard at the last meeting. And as I've said in the past, I challenge anyone to come up with a similar project ever built or proposed on the peninsula that requires this much office space just to be profitable. That's probably because it doesn't exist. It was also unsettling that we keep relying on a survey that was created by city staff that didn't even ask respondents if they lived in Redwood City. And they were asked questions where the answer was 1, broader growth, 2, planned downtown growth, or 3, intense transit district growth, without being given a clear definition or the implications of these terms. I followed this stuff closely and I didn't even understand the question, and yet the results were touted at the first council meeting. And finally, we have a Sequoia Station petition that you were sent earlier today with updated numbers that now has over 1,000 signatures, 92% of which are Redwood City residents, simply calling for a more balanced project. Between multiple VOCA polls and the petition, we have thousands of people who believe that their vision of Sequoia Station does not comport with what the developer is advancing right now through the process. And it definitely is not in sync with the results from the survey created by city staff. If any of you question the authenticity of the VOCA results, I encourage you to reach out to Council Member Michael Smith, who's an advisor to VOCA. Perhaps not an active advisor since the election, but an advisor nonetheless, and he believes in the service. In closing, I ask you to restart the outreach with simple, easy to digest questions in a survey created by an independent third party, not city staff, and tap into the thousands and thousands of residents who do not support the Sequoia Station project in its current form. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Chris. Next is B. Beekman, followed by our last speaker, Baraka Floyd.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I speak around the South Bay, Santa Clara County. I've been to a few of your meetings to talk about open public policy ideas. Thank you for this meeting. Thank you for the words about President Biden speaking on this time of mourning for COVID. You know, it's my feeling that if there was about 300,000 deaths a year in the seasonal flu, the past years, it's my feeling that 500,000 number may be a bit small. I mean, I think we should be considering the number as 1.2, 2.5 million as a starting point. I think that would be a bit more respectful to what this COVID is about and how deadly it is and how lethal it is. It's frightening to do that. And I just hope as a part of the respectful process that we learn how to give more factual numbers. And that takes effort. Good luck to ourselves to do that. And with that in mind, your item K tonight that has, thank you for that you will be postponing giving forgiveness to utility bills. That can be, COVID is not the fault of everyday people. And we should not have to be blamed. And that's a lot to learn to consider and think about and grasp and understand. Once we do, this is a short period of time that forgiveness, rent forgiveness and utility forgiveness ideas have to be fully respected. And we'll learn important lessons from it. Thank you. A few other items I wanted to mention. You have a police officer who's very well liked and very well respected, a former retired police officer who may be put in charge of a Redwood City, San Mateo County commission on the future of policing in some way. There's been a lot of back and forth that he may be a well-liked good person, but it may be time to consider someone from Health and Human Services to lead such a commission for our future. And I just wanted to put my 2 cents in that's my feeling on the matter. There is one other item. Oh yeah, just my usual announcement of smart meter technology that you like to keep, that you feel has grown acclimated and regular. I think there always should be special notice just to simply mention we are putting a smart meter here in this town for this situation. Or in this neighborhood, I mean, for this situation, and that makes the process clear for everyone to understand. And that's open public policy, and that's good practices, responsible practices for a technology future. If I have enough time, a few more items: the comprehensive financial reports from items B and C.
Thank you, Mr. Beekman. That's the end of your time. We will now go to our last speaker, Baraka Floyd. I apologize if I mispronounced that.
No, you pronounced it correctly. Good evening and happy Black History Month, everyone. Like many of you, I've spent a lot of this month reflecting on the contributions of African Americans to our country and to our state, as well as the resiliency of American descendants of slaves. In that same vein, I want to call attention to the work of the Sequoia High School BSU and really committing to raising awareness about the harms of vaping. This is really important this month as we consider the disproportionate harms of vaping for the Black community. As a pediatrician in Redwood City, I've seen a sweet 11-year-old boy go from a straight A student to an irritable, depressed child struggling in school after starting vaping. We can't ignore the disproportionate impacts because of the fact that these children are trying to live on this backdrop of structural and institutional racism that makes it difficult, often impossible, for Black folks to optimize their health, for Black folks to have complete agency over who they are, who they become, where they go, and how they move about the world. So my hope is that with this particular issue, that we will participate in No Menthol Monday and bring attention to this issue, remove flavored tobacco products from retail stores, so that we can take away at least one additional stressor from our youth who are struggling and thriving despite the fact that there are very real structural barriers in front of them around which they have no control. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Thank you all for your comments this evening. If you're not able to provide public comment at this time, you can email your comments to the City Council at council@redwoodcity.org. At this time, all public speakers can stay on the Zoom call or continue to follow the meeting through the live broadcast, either on the city's website at www.redwoodcity.org or on cable television on local channel 26 and Comcast channel 27 or AT&T Uverse channel 99. Now moving on to item number 6, the consent calendar. These are items that are routine in nature and are approved in one motion. Councilmember G has a conflict of interest on item 6E. I'd now like to ask Councilmember G to state his conflict of interest and that he will be recusing himself from voting on that item.
Thank you, Mayor Howard. As indicated, I will be recusing myself from item 6E. My parent company has performed work on the Stanford Healthcare campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember G. So now I'd like to ask the council for a motion and a second to approve all items on the consent calendar except 6E, and then we'll do a roll call vote.
So moved. Ready?
Second, Espinosa.
Councilmember Reddy made the motion and seconded by Espinosa Garnica. Thank you. And Ms. Aguilar, would you call the roll?
Mayor,
Yes.
I did have my hand up for, I'd like to pull an item.
I'm sorry, I did not see your hand up. Go ahead, Councilmember Aguirre.
Yeah, just item 6I, I just wanted to make a comment so we can vote or I can make the comment.
Why don't you go ahead and make the comment and then we'll do the roll call.
Great. So item 6I is the transfer of the Fair Oaks Library to the San Mateo County Library. And I just want to say how important this library is to our community. And I'm looking forward to the kind of work that the county can provide to make sure that they take care of these residents that are so dear to us in Redwood City. And I look forward to working with them to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Councilmember Aguirre. I think we're all in agreement. Thank you for bringing that up. Ms. Aguilar, would you do the roll call, please?
I will. This is for all items except for 6E. Councilmember Aguirre.
Yes.
Councilmember Espinosa Garnica.
Yes.
Councilmember G.
Yes.
Councilmember Reddy.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hale.
Yes.
And Mayor Howard.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now I'd like to ask for a motion and a second to approve item 6E. Then we'll take a roll call vote.
So moved, Smith.
So
Second,
moved.
Gary.
Second, yeah, okay.
Moved by Councilmember Smith and seconded by Councilmember Aguirre. Ms. Aguilar, roll call, please.
We'll start with Councilmember Espinosa Garnica.
Yes.
Councilmember Reddy.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Aguirre.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hale.
Yes.
And Mayor Howard.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 votes. Councilmember G is recused.
Thank you. And now I'll read the items that we just voted on. The annual investment policy review, investment report for period ending September 30th, 2020. Comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. Replacement of 140 personal computers and related software licenses from CDW-G. Final acceptance of construction improvements for the Stanford in Redwood City Phase 1 development project and release of associated bonds and approval of an improvement agreement with Stanford Healthcare. Final acceptance of Marshall Street intersection improvements at Jefferson Avenue and Middlefield Road. Summary vacation of a sanitary sewer and storm drainage easement on the property at 3558 Jefferson Avenue. Agreement for a permit system upgrade and new software maintenance with Central Square Technologies, LLC. Transfer of operational responsibility for the Fair Oaks Library to the San Mateo County Library Joint Powers Authority. Agreement with Pacific Coast Sales and Service Incorporated for supply of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning equipment, systems, and installation services. Update on the status of utility late payments and rate assistance usage, and consideration of a 10-month extension of the late utility payment penalty waiver. Approved minutes of February 6, 2021 and February 8, 2021 City Council meetings, and approved claims and checks from February 22nd, 2021 through March 8, 2021, and the usual and necessary payments through March 8, 2021. We'll now move on to item number 7, a public hearing to adopt the 2021 solid waste rates for regular and unscheduled services provided by Recology, San Mateo County. I'd like to ask our Public Works Services Director, Terrence Jaw, to give us the presentation. Mr. Jaw?
Thank you, Mayor Howard. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Howard and Council. I am Terrence Jaw, Director of Public Works. With me, Superintendent Adrian Lee and staff from Recology are standby for any question from the Council or the community members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with a short presentation before opening the public hearing. This evening, staff is submitting Council consideration for solid waste rate adjustment for calendar year 2021. Madam Clerk, next slide, please. Here is an overview of today's presentations. Next slide, please. This slide represents steps necessary for council action, and this slide will repeat at the end of the presentation for your convenience. Next slide, please. At this point, I would like to give a brief background of Redwood City Solid Waste Collection Program. The City of Redwood City is one of 11-member Joint Power Agency, also known as South Bayside Waste Management Authority, acronym SBWMA. The Board of Directors oversees the agency. Our Councilwoman, Alicia Curie, is the chair of the board. The SWMA assists long-term service contract with solid waste service contractors. Next slide, please. The city current solid waste contractor is Recology of San Mateo County. The SBWMA negotiated a new 15-year service agreement with Recology starting in January 1st, 2021. Just want to let you know that solid waste collection service is a self-supporting program and is totally separate from the city general fund. The proposed solid waste rate adjustment is try to achieve two goals. The first is minimizing the rate spikes between year to year. The guidance from Council Utilities Subcommittee was to manage the rate spikes. Staff tried to achieve that direction with these enterprises facing rate pressure such as rising labor costs, reduced revenue from recyclable material, and increased transportation costs. I also wanted to note that the proposed solid waste rate are based on multi-year expenditure projection rather than relying on year-to-year expenditure. The second goal we are trying to achieve is realigning the rate structure in the solid waste collection. The current rate structure was developed more than a decade ago, and it's not in line with the current day requirements. We believe that this proposed rate will assist us to get the realignment we are trying to achieve. Next slide, please. This table represents the proportion of customer with the size of the trash can they subscribe. Next slide, please. At this point, staff is proposing $1 per month increase for subscribers of 20 and 32 gallons trash cans. If council approved, subscriber of 20 gallons trash can will be paying $16.87 per month, and subscribers of 32 gallons trash can will be paying $33.86 per month. Next slide, please. Staff is also proposing a 2.57% increase for unscheduled solid waste services. These services are miscellaneous services above and beyond our routine garbage collection, such as backyard collection, key service, and additional cart services. Next slide, please. I also want to draw a comparison between Redwood City proposed rate and other agencies from SBWMA. This table represents rate comparison for weekly service for 20 gallons trash can. Highlighted in green is our current rate, and highlighted in yellow is our proposed rate. As displayed, City of Redwood City proposed rate is below the median rate compared to the other agency. Next slide, please. Similar to cost comparison for 20 gallons trash can, this table represents cost comparison for weekly service for 32 gallon trash cans. Again, the city proposed rate is below the median rate for comparing with the other agency. Next slide, please. Also like to explain steps we took before this public hearing. In November of 2020, staff submitted proposed solid waste rate adjustment to Council Utility Subcommittee. The committee approved the proposed rate and recommended for full council consideration. In compliance with Proposition 218 requirement, we also mailed notification letter to all customers, approximately 20,000 in December of 2020. Staff also hosted the community outreach meetings to answer questions from residents. Those two meetings are bilingual meetings with staff Spanish speaker was available throughout the meeting. As of this evening, we have received 8 official protest letters for this proposed rate increase. Next slide, please. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the community that city is offering rate assistance program for city utility customer. As you all know, City of Redwood City utility bill is a combination bill of water, sewer, and solid waste service charge. Qualified customer can receive up to $80 credit per billing cycle, which is every 2 months. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Council approved to waive penalty for utility bill late payment. Council just approved the extending of the waiver program until December 31st, 2021. Council will also considering to establish utility bill forgiveness program in the next item of the today agenda. Since the funding will come in from the general fund, staff believe that the program will effectively assist in those who are in need during this challenging time. Next slide, please. This concludes my presentation. The slide before you is a step necessary to complete the public hearing. I am happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaw. At this time, does the council have a clarifying question before we open our public hearing? I see no hands raised. Ms. Aguilar, do you see any hand raised at this time?
Not among the council, Mayor
Okay.
Howard.
Thank you. Then I think we'll open the public hearing. In order to see how many speakers we have for the public hearing, I'd like to ask that everyone raise their hand now, and the city clerk will assist me with identifying public speakers.
Mayor Howard, there are no members of the public raising their hand. We have one. Okay, well, let's give it a couple more seconds then. Okay. It looks like at this time we have one speaker for the public hearing, Mayor Howard, and the one speaker is concerned for Redwood City. And after our speaker, there will not be any additional live public comment on this item. And Mayor Howard, did you want to give the speaker 3 minutes?
Yes, Ms. Aguilar, we'll give the speaker 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Once you begin speaking concern for Redwood City, the timer will begin. You can begin your public comment at any time.
Yes. I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. So I'm gathered with some folks I'm close to. And so talking amongst ourselves, we were sort of taken aback by North Fair Oaks and East Palo Alto having to pay more for the same service. We're wondering why. We would appreciate having detail about this. Off the top of my head, it doesn't seem to be through a racial equity lens. So could you please address both why the cost differential and why the poor folks have to pay more than the well-heeled folks here in Redwood City with an average annual salary of $150,000 a year and $1.5 million homes? Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers, Mayor Howard.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. If there are no objections, I will now close the public hearing and we'll have council discussion. And I know that there was a question that was brought up by the previous speaker. So at some point, I'd like to ask Mr. Jaw if he could answer that question about other jurisdictions, other cities having different rate structures.
Thank you, Mayor Howard. This is like a decision that made by the various city government. For example, City of East Palo Alto, they only have one size of trash bin. I believe they are like a citywide, it's like a 64 or 92 gallons bin. I can get a verification from Mike Kelly, Recology General Manager in audience. Mike, you don't mind assisting with this?
Yeah, hi, this is Mike Kelly. I'm the general manager at Recology San Mateo County, and that is correct. The city of East Palo Alto has one service level. It's a 96-gallon container. That's their standard size container.
So Mayor Howard, with that, so that their size is like we don't have a variable, we have a variable option, whereas they only have a one option. So that's why that, their rate is a bit higher than us. We are only focusing on our 20 and 32 gallons can. And we do have a higher price can, which is 64 and 92 gallons can.
Thank you, Mr. Jaw. I appreciate the information. Would any council member have questions for Mr. Jaw? Just raise your hand. Who would like to be first?
Mayor Howard, I did have my hand raised first.
Okay, I'm having difficulty seeing your hand, so I'm going to ask our city clerk if she can help me. It's not showing up on my screen. I'm sorry, but go ahead, Ms. Espinoza-Garnica, go ahead.
And then she will be followed by Councilmember Reddy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi. Yes, so this adoption of the raise, it does concern me solely because it is during the pandemic. And I'm sure that if any folks were concerned about it, it is probably due to the instability folks are experiencing with COVID. And we definitely are seeing an increase in homelessness in California. So I'd like to know more about the alternative to so the alternative, which is postponing, what would the payment plan or project would look like, and how you perceive the concerns, and if you've assessed like how you've assessed the concerns, like if there is any concern to have, or been able to reach with the community to understand how they're doing. I know that there's a lot of concerns and instability with rent, and we do have our type of mutual aid, but it can only do so much. So I'm very curious as to what you know.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Council Member Espinosa Garnica. So that the proposed rate is only focusing on area that we needed to address. Just wanted to let you know that the solid waste collection program doesn't have that much cushion or the reserve fund to substitute if it is the program run negative. So what we look at it on the whole entire program, there's two areas, whereas the 19 and 32 gallons trash cans, their rate is artificially low. And when compared with the other agency, even though our proposed rate is below the median for the other agency, so that we believe that is it kind of like we kind of like take a vaccine in a way it's needed, and at the same time we're not touching the area that we don't need to touch. So kind of like a little precise treatment that we give it to this program, and at the same time the assistance program or the utility bill forgiveness program will way offset this cost. Just want to let you know that that the increase is only increase $12 per year increase for those subscribers. So just want to let you know.
Yeah, with that part about how our rates, I understand that our rates are compared to others on the lower end, but I'm not sure if that is sufficient to say that it is still affordable. Because it kind of makes me think of the argument about affordable housing, because, oh, if it's called affordable or if it's called inexpensive, then everyone can afford it. So I'm more curious on that perspective, like, have we done any further digging to answer that beyond just assuming that because our rates are lower on the lower spectrum, that it is affordable by our residents in Redwood City and all of our residents? Like, if it becomes a burden, what can our residents do?
Thank you. So mainly what we do on this proposal was to make sure that this program not run negative. So that we look at it many years, look forward, and making sure that gradual increase so that residents don't need to face for the ridiculous rate spikes that like future year. So that we are gradually ramping it up. We know that in the future we will have to raise rate a lot, so that gradually ramping it up so that with time comes that we be ready to face the rate pressure. Also saw the
and if I might interject as well, Melissa Stevenson Diaz, City Manager, I would add that in the next item, when we describe the update on the budget, you'll see that there is some special funding proposed for customers who are behind on their utility payments. And that is in direct response to knowing that there are some folks in our community who are especially hurt right now economically. And so I would say that's more the location where we're looking to address the specific individuals who are experiencing economic impacts.
Okay, and I don't mean to take up much time, but I just wanted to clarify then the last part. What does the alternative rate implementation schedule look like if we were to proceed with delaying the proposed resolution?
If we delay the rate increase, the current customer will see the large rate spikes in the future years.
Excuse me, Mr. Jacques.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, could you also maybe elaborate on the fact that the utility, water, sewer, solid waste, we're under different rules and regulations that we just can't arbitrarily decide not to collect. We have to, if we want to suspend utility, we have to eat the difference basically, because we are under certain rules and regulations because of these special accounts that we have set up. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Howard. Yes, you make a good point on that. Is that our water enterprise, sewer enterprise, and also the solid waste enterprise are the self-sustaining funds, and they are really controlled by the Proposition 218 that we can only charge for the customer that the actual cost of doing providing its service, so that there's no money that going into any type of profits. The only money that extra saving will be, it's kind of a saving as a reserve fund for the sometime the enterprise run shortfall and we can substitute. Other than that is the customers are paying the actual providing service to solid waste pickup. In this case, residents are receiving not only garbage, they only receive the green bins and also recyclable pickup, so that they have the 3 bins for the 1 price.
Does that help, Ms. Espinosa-Garnica? I think that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Ms. Aguilar, do you see another? You said council member ready?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much, Mr. Job, for your explanation. I appreciated in the staff report, you're including the information. On one hand, the city is only charging what it must in order to provide this service, right? And so I just wanted to thank you for clarifying that, 1, we're only providing what we must. 2, we're trying to avoid spiking rates in the future. And we are suspending and waiving the fees on the other areas where we are able to. And I was just wondering on that note, for those people who sent protest letters, did we circle back to them and check in with them to see if this was a situation where they might need that kind of support?
Traditionally, we acknowledge the protest letter, and we had a communication with the individual that sent out to the letter, and we always let them know that available program if they wanted to participate in these type of assistance program.
And you reported that we only received 2 letters?
We received 8 letters.
8 letters, okay. Well, in a city with the population that we have, I think that staff should also be commended that we only received 8 letters. So thank you for that.
Are there any other questions from council?
Council Member Aguirre has her hand raised, Mayor Howard.
Council Member Aguirre.
Thank you. And thank you also to Director Shaw for this report. Having been the chair of the Utilities Committee for a number of years, I know how hard they work in Public Works and also the committee to make sure that the rates are never double digits. We want to make sure that it's something that our community can really afford. And I'm proud that we have the kind of forgiveness programs that we have. And we just approved item 6K, which was the rate assistance and the 10-month extension and the penalty waiver. So those are ways that we are trying to make sure that folks that are that needing the assistance can get it. And if there are others, I think the community needs to know that they can apply for those if they haven't done so. So I know it's a burden in general, anything right now during the pandemic, but I think the city of Redwood City, in my history of being on the Utilities Committee, has really done a good job of trying to provide a good service, but also making it affordable as much as possible. So I want to thank the committee, and I also want to thank our Public Works staff for doing the great work that they do.
Thank you, Council Member Aguirre. I would like to agree with you. I think our Public Works Department, Mr. Jaw, excellent work. And thank you to the Utilities Committee, because I know uppermost in your mind is to be fair and reasonable at all costs. So that's what you're doing. And I see in the report that you're recommending, it doesn't, maybe in our mid-year budget, you're recommending a forgiveness program to further give relief to people who are having a rough time at this time. So I know we'll have more discussion on this at the mid-year budget review. So thank you very much, Mr. Job, and for answering all the clarifying questions. I appreciate it. If there are no other council questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Councilmember Gita.
Okay, move to
Second.
approve by
Second, Betty.
Councilmember Aguirre and seconded by Councilmember Reddy. Ms. Aguilar, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, I will. We'll start with Councilmember G,
Yes.
Councilmember Reddy,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Aguirre,
Yes.
Councilmember Espinosa Garnica,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hale,
Yes.
and Mayor Howard.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much to our staff. I appreciate the report. Moving on now to staff reports, item number 8, fiscal year 2019 through 2020 year-end budget update and adjustment to fiscal year 2020 through 21 budget, fiscal year 2020-21 mid-year budget update, and proposed framework for development of the fiscal year 2021-22 budget. I'd like to ask our city manager, Melissa Stevenson Diaz, if she will give the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Howard and council and members of the community. First, I just want to double check on the sound level. Is the sound okay, Mayor?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, at least I have one. Thank you. So I'll begin the presentation this evening on our last year's ending status and then move into our mid-year budget update and our recommended approach for developing next year's budget. And I'll be joined partway through by Assistant City Manager and Administrative Services Director Michelle Poche-Flaherty. And I particularly want to thank her and Financial Services Manager Derek Rampone for their tremendous work in putting together this update, as well as our Public Communications Manager Jennifer Yamaguma, who have all done a terrific job in supporting this effort. As well, tonight, staff department heads will be available should you have detailed questions that this team can't answer. So the overall agenda, I'll take the first 2 items. I'll talk briefly about the city's approach to financial management and review our operating balance from last fiscal year, and then turn it over to Ms. Poche-Flaherty to take the update on the current year budget, provide context for next year's budget, and our recommendations for how to approach next year's budget. Then we'll conclude, of course, with your questions and input. And in terms of the questions, the way we'll come back to are whether there's any changes you'd like to make to our recommended uses for last year's operating balance, whether there's any changes you would like to make to recommended adjustments to the current year budget, whether the council has support for the overall strategy for developing the next year's budget, 21-22, including the timeline, and if there's any other feedback that you would like to give. So just as brief background, I do want to make sure to appreciate that the council has had a strong history of proactive fiscal management, and that's included taking intentional, proactive, and strategic steps to make sure that the city has good long-term financial stability and sustainability. This includes, on an annual basis, adopting structurally balanced budgets, funding long-term needs, and maintaining a 15% general fund reserve. This history of strong financial management has resulted in the city being recognized by outside agencies. Some of you will recall a couple of years ago, the credit agency Moody's upgraded the city's credit rating to AA1, which is the second highest rating that a municipality can receive. And starting in 2018, we started to receive distinguished budget awards from the Government Finance Officers Association. We have consistently received clean audits from independent outside auditors. 4 years ago, the city began the process of reshaping our service delivery for the future in order to fund upcoming costs and long-term obligations. And some elements of that included accelerating our funding of pension commitments to save taxpayers $38 million. Additionally, we started to look at opportunities to contain costs through efficiencies, partnerships, shared services, and innovative improvements to city operations. We developed a 10-year forecast to provide a longer-term roadmap on financial sustainability. We obtained substantial voter support for revenues to sustain essential operations, something we're especially grateful for this year with our unprecedented losses. And in all of that, we've continued to invest in our employees and our organizational culture in order to support innovation. And there too, that strategy has really helped us at a time when we faced challenges we could not have imagined. As we know, the pandemic has presented major health and economic challenges, and it's brought widespread attention to long-term inequity in our society. City revenues have dropped in the last year by nearly 10%, while community needs have skyrocketed. Last year, the City Council adopted a COVID-19 recovery strategy nicknamed the 3 Rs. And the key elements of that are to respond to immediate community needs resulting from the pandemic, with particular focus on care for seniors and vulnerable residents. And that's an effort that began at the beginning and will continue for some time. The second element is to restore our community's cultural, economic, and social vitality in partnership with community organizations and businesses. That work too has begun and will continue for some time. And the third element is to reimagine public services in light of evolving community needs and our financial resources. And this element has begun on a more limited scale and is something that will have increasing attention in the next year and the years to come. I want to just quickly remind you and the community of a few of the ways we've been focused on this recovery strategy. And this is really starting from a human perspective and how we've been striving to meet vital community needs. As you know, we've managed to maintain and actually borrow staff and bring them over to the Fair Oaks Community Center in order to ensure that we can provide essential human services, including emergency food, homeless support services, safety net information, and referral services. And from March 1st, 2020 through the beginning of this month, the Fair Oaks Community Center has served over 1,200 unduplicated individuals in over 700 households, including 172 families with children. Additionally, the city has provided over $3 million in rent relief to assist 3,500 individuals in over 1,000 households. Rent relief is one of the top needs that was identified in a recent Stanford study that the city helped to sponsor. Between the county, the city, and private funding sources, we still have about $500,000 available to continue providing rent relief. And additionally, new money is coming to the county from the federal government, and funds will be allocated to assist residents in Redwood City and North Fair Oaks as well. Additionally, we have spent a significant effort trying to support our business community. Recently, with the lifting of the regional stay-at-home order, we've been able to resume outdoor business program. And there are now 40 businesses in the downtown and 11 businesses outside of downtown participating in this program. Starting this week, we're hosting roundtables with business community members to help inform an upcoming economic resiliency plan. And this will help our business community continue to withstand and bounce back from the pandemic-induced economic crisis. You've called out, we need to care for those who are vulnerable, especially our seniors. And we've developed a wide range of programs to help seniors feel less isolated and ensure they have adequate food. Today, our seniors were surprised at lunch pickup with Valentine's and Lunar New Year treats, thanks to our great team at the Veterans Memorial Senior Center. We have served over 75,000 meals to seniors since last March, serving 600 seniors a week. And then thinking of our children and youth, we know that their needs are dramatic during this time. We are currently providing distant learning support to 100 students at 5 sites. We're also supporting Redwood City Child Development Program at the Fair Oaks Community Center, which helps safely provide childcare for 52 children. To date, 91% of all Redwood City programs that have applied for financial assistance as part of the county's Child Care Relief Fund have received funding. And we've distributed over $800,000 in funding to these child care providers. Finally, the county is now providing a hub that shows where users can easily find free and safe public Wi-Fi access points, and Redwood City access points are now included in that map. So now turning to a budget perspective and looking at our status and our days ahead, we've taken several steps to reduce spending while maintaining our ability to provide services. And this includes selectively freezing staffing, but avoiding layoffs so that we can continue to provide essential services. 70% of our operating budget goes to employee-related costs, so holding vacancies saves money. This is just the first step toward developing new service delivery models, an effort that will take some time. At the same time, we've also made progress on the City Council's top priorities of housing, transportation, and children and youth, and advanced other significant policies, including a climate action plan and a new foundational guiding principle of equity. Because of the swift action we took last spring to save money, as well as greater than expected revenues last fiscal year, we have an operating balance of $12.1 million from fiscal year 1920. This is $1.1 million more than we expected in October, as was reported in our annual financial report that you accepted with the consent calendar. With the next two slides, I'll discuss our recommendations for using those one-time funds. Typically, we would use 80% of one-time funds to pay down liabilities and 20% to support City Council priorities. But this year, I'm recommending a different approach in light of the pandemic's significant economic and other impacts to the community. While maintaining our reserves, I am recommending that 62% of the $12.1 million balance, or $7.5 million, be retained so that we have a cushion to offset a projected deficit next fiscal year. And I'm recommending that the remaining amount, or $4.6 million, be used to fund critical community needs and council priorities. These proposed reinvestments are prioritized for responding to the impacts of the pandemic, reimagining city services and programs for greater equity and efficiency, and fueling the community's recovery and revitalization. So with these next two slides, I'll provide some more details. The first set of recommendations is related to pandemic response and recovery. And first, I'm asking the council for $800,000 to support staffing in the fire department. This is particularly important at this time as the fire department employees are being deployed to help provide COVID-19 vaccinations in our community as part of the coordinated San Mateo County response to the pandemic. These funds will ensure that this work proceeds without delay and that we have full funding for the department for this current year. The fire department has identified $500,000 in operating savings for this year, and consideration of adjusting to service models is work that will continue into next fiscal year as we continue to look at reimagining services. Second, asking for $750,000 for a one-time forgiveness program for disadvantaged utility customers. As we've just described in the last item, we know that since the pandemic has started, that we have already been waiving penalties and interest for customers who are late in their payments. Additionally, we are not shutting off services during this time. While providing temporary relief, this practice has resulted in many customers owing substantial amounts of money. The total bill at this time is approximately $2 million. The proposed program of $750,000 would help us make progress toward addressing those unpaid bills. It would help us with a one-time subsidy of a portion of the overdue bills for customers who can demonstrate financial need and commit to a payment plan to bring their accounts back to zero. And if supported by the City Council, we would come back with specific program details later this spring. Next, we are experiencing costs related to the pandemic on indirect services. Because we have had delays in certain programs, including upgrading software to increase efficiency, we have accrued costs that we need to address. And so $525,000 would go to technology upgrades that are needed to support organizational productivity. The next category is $450,000 for small business support. As many of you know, in the last couple of weeks, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative has committed approximately $400,000 in grants to Redwood City restaurants, breweries, and wineries, which have suffered during the pandemic. This proposed funding would allow the city to add to that grant funding to expand the range of small businesses receiving assistance. It could also provide funding for other forms of small business support. Here too, if supported by the council, we would return with more recommendations for use of these funds. And then next in this category, $325,000 for COVID-19 testing for the city's essential workers. As testing becomes more readily available, we'd like to be able to make it more available to our employees who are serving the community in person. The next two items are related to the work to reimagine programs and services. The first is additional funding to be spent over 2 years to support communications. This would be communications related to the city's COVID-19 activities, as well as to help us with the work that we need to do within the organization and with the community to reimagine city services. We also would use funds related to data analysis to help us analyze, assess, and describe current services. And finally, use funds for community engagement related to new service approaches. These funds could also be used to help ensure effective outreach to vulnerable community members. The next category is $350,000 in additional funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. This too would be spent over 2 years and would help support the implementation of the equity plan we expect to return to the council later this year. This plan would be developed in conjunction with the council's expected Equity and Social Justice Subcommittee and would help the city introduce an equity lens to the delivery of services and review of city policies. And then the last category for the operating balance is for long-term needs. First, the $7.5 million I mentioned to offset the expected deficit for next year. And then next, seeking additional funds, $800,000 toward homelessness services, healthy streets, and parking enforcement. The infusion of these funds into this budget would bring our total commitment to homelessness-related services and addressing community impacts associated with homelessness to $2.5 million over 3 years. This is in addition to funding previously allocated to the Safe RV Parking Pilot Program and to the Downtown Streets Program. Again, if supported by the City Council, we would return with specific program requests to use these funds. And then the final category is $200,000 toward 2 studies, and this would only be partial funding for each of these studies. One is related to improving the levees around Redwood shores, and the second would provide seed money to study creation of a bayfront park in the Inner Harbor area. And again, the total amounts to $12.1 million. So I'd like to now turn the presentation over to Assistant City Manager Michelle Poche-Flaherty, who will provide an update on our current year revenues and expenditures and lead us into consideration of next year's budget development.
Thank you, and please let me know if there's any problem with my mic. Turning now to our current fiscal year budget, our total revenues and transfers in are projected to be $151.7 million, or $1 million higher than the October estimate of $150.7 million. Many of our revenue sources have been volatile this year. Our property tax revenues are $3.6 million higher than expected due to an excess in state educational revenue augmentation funds, also known as ERAF. But this increase is offset by lower than expected property taxes received in the downtown area. And that was due to a permanent new change in the calculation of former RDA property taxes caused by a recent court decision. License and permit revenue is expected to be $1.2 million higher than what it was forecast in October due to increased building permit revenue and cannabis-related business tax revenues. Sales tax receipts are expected to be $900,000 higher than what was forecast in October due to higher than expected revenues from the Measure RR sales tax. Interest earnings, revenue from other agencies, charges for services, and utility user tax revenues are the other revenue categories with higher than expected revenue. Partially offsetting these increased revenues is a $3 million decrease from our October estimate for transient occupancy tax, also known as TOT or hotel tax. The travel and hospitality industry has been hit extremely hard by the pandemic, and travel is almost non-existent. So we don't project our hotel tax to recover to its pre-pandemic levels until FY 2028-29. We had anticipated a revenue from self-insurance fund of about $1 million, but we now plan to retain this money in reserves of the self-insurance fund due to potential claims that have not yet been recorded in the self-insurance fund yet. With regard to expenditures, we're expecting them to be $2.7 million lower than we originally estimated in October. The October estimate was $149.9 million, but we're now projecting 147.2 million. And as you can see here on the slide, expenditures in most departments are estimated to be lower than budget, except for fire, community development and transportation, and library. These are estimates based on year-to-date actuals and historical spend ratios, and we will continue to work with departments to maintain expenditures within their budgets. As a result of higher than expected utility user tax revenues, we're projecting an additional $200,000 to be transferred to the CIP fund for capital projects. Due to a reduction in FY 2021-22 revenues, our reserve contribution has decreased by $500,000 as the reserve contribution is based on 15% of the next year's total revenue. We're also estimating a lower transfer amount, $200,000, to fund Docktown Marina operations based on updated estimated operating costs. Putting the revenues and expenditures together, we originally projected a $3.7 million deficit for fiscal year 2020-21, and we're now projecting a deficit of just $77,000. Pivoting now to planning ahead for the fiscal year 2021-22 budget, we start first with an economic update. The finance staff consults numerous sources, including the California Legislative Analyst's Office, Marin Economic Consulting Group, and our investment advisory firm, PFM Asset Management. As you're well aware, March 2020 was the beginning of an extraordinary time in our nation and for Redwood City. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered a collapse of the global economy along with a nationwide public health crisis. But in addition to those challenges, the environmental impacts of climate change also brought unprecedented number of wildfires throughout the western United States, more than doubling the millions of US acres burned compared to the previous year. Redwood City's firefighters were deployed to multiple strike teams in San Mateo County and throughout the Bay Area, which was blanketed with air quality rated the worst in the world at the time. Extreme weather events such as recent winter storms are becoming more common, as are the wildfires, making it difficult to predict the potential financial impacts of climate change in future years. Perhaps the most discouraging economic impact of the pandemic is unemployment. In December 2019, Redwood City unemployment was 1.6%. Yet our latest data shows the unemployment rate in Redwood City now remains at more than 3 times higher than it was in December 2019, 5.3%. This is compared to the national rate of 6.7%. We've updated our 10-year general fund forecast and now project a slight deficit of $77,000 for fiscal year 2020-21, followed by a $7.5 million deficit in fiscal year 2022, and subsequent deficits through fiscal year 2025-26, ranging between $263,000 and $4.4 million. Similar to the national outlook, Redwood City continues to project a gradual recovery of revenues comparable to the Nike swoosh shape. Projected revenues are not expected to reach pre-pandemic levels until fiscal year 2024-25, about 4 years from now. Revenue projections for fiscal year 2021-22 indicate no growth from fiscal year 2020-21. However, subsequent years are expected to have revenue growth, but at a much slower pace over the 10-year period. 70% of our operating costs are due to employee-related expenses, and these costs are growing even though staffing levels are lower than they've been in the past. We owe $324 million to fully fund pension and retiree health benefits for current employees and retirees. Unfortunately, that number grew over the last year in spite of additional pension contributions. This is a result of CalPERS lowering its discount rate, which is the estimated rate of return on CalPERS investments. And they're doing that with gradual steps. This change has raised the costs for all employers, including Redwood City. The city's unfunded pension liability is primarily related to employees who are already retired or have left employment with the city. In addition to pension costs, the unfunded retiree health liability is an additional $49.5 million. In 2017, the city established a Section 115 pension trust to pre-fund the city's pension obligations over time. Between contributions and investment returns, in December 2020, our Section 115 pension trust account was valued at approximately $27 million. The preliminary 10-year general fund forecast includes general fund contributions toward the city's pension liability beyond the required annual payment, including additional direct annual payments to CalPERS ranging from $250,000 to $2.5 million, and annual contributions of $500,000 to the city's Section 115 pension trust account through fiscal year 2022-23. Trust proceeds, including investment earnings, will be used in future years to help pay for increased annual pension costs. Increasing the funds invested in the trust and maintaining those funds over a longer time frame will provide greater resources to pay for the city's pension costs in the future. Melissa spoke earlier about council priorities at the beginning of this slide presentation, and there are several expenditure items related to these council priorities that were included in the fiscal year 2019-20 10-year general fund forecast that now need to be appropriated so that they can be spent. Staff is recommending budget appropriations of $3.3 million in fiscal year 2020-21 in order to continue the advancement of City Council priorities. Historically, we have not budgeted for these types of items until the final operating balance is known. The recommended appropriations for fiscal year 2019-20 are shown here. In addition to the $3.3 million from fiscal year 2019-20, staff is recommending budget appropriations of $2.9 million in fiscal year 2020-21 in order to continue the advancement of City Council priorities. These appropriations were identified in the revised budget adopted on October 26, 2020, but were not deducted at that time. The appropriations are shown here. With these appropriations, we continue to maintain the city's 15% operating reserve at $22.7 million, shown in dark blue. Additionally, $7.5 million is set aside to offset the projected deficit we described for next year, and that's shown in light blue. Then the $10.8 million is recommended for council priorities in all of the categories that Melissa discussed earlier. Turning finally to next year's budget, we propose the following strategy to develop the recommended budget for next fiscal year. Adhere to financial best practices and City Council fiscal priorities. Advance the city's strategic plan, including the council's top 3 priorities: housing, transportation, and children and youth, taking into account input received at the City Council's February 6th meeting, and implement the city's pandemic response and recovery strategy. That completes our presentation of the mid-year budget update. We will return to Council in April for study sessions on the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Capital Improvement Program, and of course in June for the adoption of the annual budget. We're asking you this evening if you support this overall strategy and whether there are any changes or feedback you have for us. We would be happy to take questions from the Council and clarify any further issues at this time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flaherty, and thank you, Melissa Stevenson-Diaz, for your wonderful presentation. I see one hand raised for a clarifying question before we go into public comment. Council Member Espinoza Garnica.
Oh, sorry. I forgot that we had public comment before we spoke. My bad.
No problem. So why don't we go right into public comment on this item? If anyone wishes to speak, please raise your hand now, and I'll have the city clerk assist me with identifying public speakers. At this time, I see 4 hands raised. If anyone wishes to speak to this budget item, please raise your hand now. Give it another minute, Ms. Aguilar.
Yes.
So at this time, I see 7 hands raised. Okay, Ms. Aguilar, I'll turn it over to you. And I would say that we could give each speaker 3 minutes to speak. And I see the last speaker is Somali Dada.
That's correct, Mayor Howard. We have 7 speakers. Somali Datta will be our last speaker. After Ms. Datta speaks, we won't be taking any live public comment, but if you have comments that you would like to submit to council, you can do so by emailing council@redwoodcity.org. I will call 2 names at a time in the order that you have raised your hands. The timer will begin when you start speaking. It's okay for your comments to be brief, and it's okay to state that you agree with a previous or other speaker. We will start with Concerned for Redwood City, followed by Livy Beja. Go ahead, you can unmute yourself. There you go.
Good, thanks. So under the heading of the recommended new appropriations to support council priorities for 20 and 21, or the fiscal year, I'm hoping that someone would answer the following questions that I have. That what is it about the cleaning up of public streets and sidewalks when a priority should be the repair of sidewalks? Because I'm going to be silly here. I don't care how clean my sidewalk is, but if it's crumbling or some panel or piece of it is sticking up, so I can, when I'm out jogging, I can trip over it and crack my skull. I think the city could do a lot, particularly in District 3, perhaps, actually fixing sidewalks so people can remain healthy when they're walking to catch the bus for their to go to work, or catching the train to go to work. With respect to the calendar, or this suggested way of approaching the 21-22 fiscal year budget, my suggestion, if you would please, by the way, if the first question could be answered, difference between clean up the street, sidewalk, and fix the sidewalk. on the budget development process, recommend an early April study session on the police budget, exposing details line by line, what makes them up. City manager may recall that I sent a email a couple, 3-4 months ago, pointing out a specific line item for patrol officers, right? This big number that when divided by the 77 or so patrol officers looked like an astronomical $320,000 a year salary. My guess, however, was in fact the case. That's the fully loaded cost. Still not clear how it's arrived at, but the city manager thankfully explained to me that the officers were not allocated a cost for their squad cars, which I had kind of expected would be the case. But I think by having this study session on the police budget, everyone can come to understand and critique these massive numbers to which no detail is provided and hard to find in the budget document. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next is Livy Beha, followed by Mike Elihi.
Hi there. Good evening, City Council members and City Manager and City staff. My name is Livy Bia. I'm a resident of Redwood City. And thank you so much for putting on this presentation. It was very informative and great job to the city for managing, the corresponding crises of climate change and COVID and racial equity, and working as a city to get all of these sorts of pieces in place. And tonight I wanted to come to you to ask more that when we're thinking about the 3 R's of the COVID response, reimagine, that this budgeting process could absolutely be an opportunity for us to start to reimagine the way in which we are inviting members of our community to take part in how we're talking about how money is being spent and making sure that that is an equitable process. And so I would highly encourage more participatory processes between now and June when the final budget is allowed. As the previous speaker mentioned, I think more study sessions on certain sections of the budget would be very informative to certain, or, including the police budget, but I think that could go to many city services so that citizens can understand what's going into these budgets and why they're so important, and then have some level of accountability from the city to say, if citizens are saying this is not important to us, don't spend money on this anymore, that the city can report back and say, we've adjusted these line items to spend more in certain places. And I think that that would be a show of really looking to illustrate how we're reimagining these processes. Second, I also wanted to address the equity plan budget, the line item for the $350,000. And I would hope that the city is able to increase or decrease that budget for implementation based on what's in the plan. And I hope that someone can clarify that that is possible, because I would hate for us to be limited in executing that plan based on the budget that we have for these $350,000 over 2 years, because it could be more, it could be less, but if we haven't created the plan yet, then it doesn't really make sense to commit to just that line item. So I hope that that could be clarified. That's all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Mike Elihi, followed by Clara Jackal.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Manager, and staff and council. First of all, As a firefighter, as a part of the Redwood City Fire Department, I want to personally thank each and every one of you, not only on behalf of our first responders who I work with, but truly on behalf of our citizens. The fire department is operating at an unprecedented rate these days, and it's comforting to know that the city is proposing this current amended proposal to the previous budgetary requests. As we continue to give vaccines and respond to our communities in these times during this pandemic, I want to publicly acknowledge our city staff and our council for one, bringing this amendment up, and two, hopefully coming to a unanimous approval of the amended budget. We are truly in the apex of this pandemic, and I just want everybody to know that your firefighters are working hard. They're working more hours than ever, and they're truly working outside their traditional scope. The fire department and the response that we traditionally provide is constantly changing and constantly evolving. And as we continue our partnership, i.e. the partnership of Redwood City firefighters with our city staff, city council, and our community, I honestly look forward to building a proactive and sustainable future for not only the Redwood City firefighters, but a sustainable future for the Redwood City citizens. Again, I want to personally thank city staff, city manager, city council. I think you guys need to be acknowledged for the detailed look and the detailed work you've done on this current budgetary request. And as a Redwood City firefighter, I'm honored to be a partner in this city with everybody here. Thank you.
Thank you. Clara Jackal, followed by call-in user 1. Go ahead, Clara.
Can you hear? So it's really good to see that the city has, are you hearing me? Yeah, it's really good to see that the city has more funds available in the current fiscal year. So that's great to see. I wanted to urge the city, looking at the item about devoting some of those funds to the Healthy Streets program, like as previous speaker, I think it would be really good to devote funds to repairing streets and sidewalks, especially in low-income neighborhoods. I've been hearing from some neighbors that there have been longstanding issues that haven't been addressed. So I think that investing in that infrastructure repair would be really valuable. It would improve the quality of life and property values for homeowners there. So I would really advocate for focusing on that and not so much on parking enforcement. And then looking ahead to the budget for the fiscal year for 2021, 2022, I would want to call to your attention again what many residents have said on many occasions since last summer, which is that the police department takes up a disproportionately large percentage of the city's budget. And we know that crime goes down when people's basic needs are met. So I urge you to invest in strengthening the community in ways that reduce the occurrence of crime up front, rather than in policing after the fact. Since one of the biggest factors for healthy community is stable housing for everyone, I urge you to prioritize creating more shelters for in-house people and more long-term affordable housing. And also urge investment to redress our history of racial discrimination in housing by funding homeownership programs for residents of color. And also to help address these issues, I second the call made for a study session on the budget for public safety. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Call-in user 1, followed by B. Beekman.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Marcelina Luna. I'm a longtime resident of Redwood City, and I do agree with a lot of the previous speakers as well around the budget, and very happy to know that we do have extra funds available to give back to our community. I would like to comment on 2 items that stand out to me about the recommended appropriations budget and development. We really need our sidewalks repaired, especially in the Stambaugh Heller community and other unserved communities that we've had for many years, as opposed to cleaning them up. We have elderly residents that live in those communities that are unable to go for walks in their own neighborhood because they are afraid of tripping and falling. Having them repaired will bring true permanent equity to this neighborhood versus just cleaning them up, which would be a temporary and not a permanent solution. And it also, repairing these sidewalks will bring the area to be in compliance with ADA, the American Disability Act compliance. And I know a few months ago, the council made a proclamation declaring ADA month. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in the working class communities. The other topic is to really have a study session on the Redwood CDPD budget, which absorbs, like other callers had said, the large amount of our taxpayers' money. We need to have a study session that justifies that amount of spending on the police budget. Not only am I requesting to know on what and how the money is being spent, but also the negative impacts that over-policing has on our working class communities. I'm advocating that our police departments serve all residents in an equitable way, and for the City Council to take into consideration last summer's listening sessions for what the community wants and requested from our elected officials. And I feel that a lot of the feedback that the elected officials received from the listening sessions was really just brushed aside and made excuses for it, and nothing really has changed. So if the city elected officials are true about equity, here's a great opportunity. You guys keep passing way too many great opportunities over and over again, and here we are again. So what will you do this time? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Luna. B. Beekman, followed by our final speaker, Somali Datta.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thank you very much for the presentation of this item. I was really impressed with how you delivered it and what you described. You know, I think we've gone through a lot since 9/11, in fact, and I think, you know, since about 2014, we were really on the way back as a country to begin to say sorry for the events of 9/11 and just rebuild ourselves. And open public policies that I'm a part of offers that sustainability, and a bunch, like with a bunch of other practices, you know, there's good practices in this country that are growing. You know, equity was doing things way before COVID. So, you know, there was an important future that's been developing, and I hope we can continue that, those good efforts. And that's the peace. That's the ideas of peace for our future and sustainability, and good, you know, ideas of civil rights and civil protections and all the good stuff. That's our great American export in a way. So, so with that all said, thank you for also talking about natural disaster issues that that may be in our future in the Bay Area in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, we've learned good things at this time, and you've shown great examples of how our budget can survive. We're going to have a next difficult 5 to 10 years that, boy, you know, there's also the possibility of an earthquake, along with the wildfires and sea level rise. I just hope we're ready, and you've offered the tools. You know, it's the forgiveness programs that we really have to respect at this time that can help us in these coming years, that if these sort of next rounds of natural disasters take place. And just to really emphasize again, you know, this current COVID situation is not the fault of everyday people, and we have to learn the mindset that we should not have to be paying its debt, you know, because of it. And you guys do a great job as much as you can to help as local government. It's time to take that extra step when needed. And, you know, you're practicing the ideas of equity as you described, and I'm really impressed by that concept. As a previous public comment offered, why not begin to show exactly what those budget practices are? They would be great examples that are just simply constructive and helpful, and everybody would learn and grow from that experience. And that's what I'm into, and that's what I'm trying to learn. How can we be open at this time with each other and share, you know, subsidy ideas is an important concept that we have to understand. You talked about garbage issues and such, and the tiered system that subsidy plans can work for different incomes. for whatever it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beekman. Our final speaker is Somali Datta.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I want to start with agreeing with a previous speaker, Ms. Luna, about study sessions on police department budget and finding alternates to policing. The rest, I have some clarification questions. So what happens if we do not pay down the pension liabilities? What is the impact to our budget? What's the rate at which we are accruing these liabilities? Is there a penalty if we don't pay down fast enough? The second question is regarding the COVID-19 vaccinations. If I understood correctly, we are proposing to add to our firefighters' budget because they are being asked to support in the vaccination efforts. And I was wondering how the vaccination efforts with our firefighters compared to what the state is planning with Blue Cross. And the last question I have is, strategically speaking, given the recommendations we have right now, how do they compare to the recommendations same time last year? And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that concludes our live public comment, Mayor Howard.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aguilar. Thank you to our speakers this evening. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to start by asking Ms. Stevenson-Diaz. There were several questions raised that I believe we have answers to, one being the pension and retiring health liability. Do we have an obligation to pay it? Do we pay it on time? And are there penalties for not doing that? Could you just elaborate a little bit on that one?
Sure, I'll start with that. So we have made commitments to primarily retired employees. Most of our obligations are related to people who are not current employees, but who have already retired. And that's 70% of the liability for safety employees is for people already retired and 50% for the non-safety employees liability. So what this means is we need to set aside money so that as more of those folks continue through their retirement and others join them in retirement, that we are solvent and that they are able to receive the benefits that have been promised to them. The council had adopted a plan to really intentionally set aside funding to pay into those obligations ahead of the schedule that the state would have had us do. So CalPERS is the state pension system. And if we just made the minimum payments that they requested, it would be 20 plus years before we would have paid off those obligations. We did a fair amount of study in the last 2 years with a lot of help from the council's finance and audit subcommittee and looked at, could we possibly set aside more money in order to pay that off earlier? And the reason for that is just like with a home mortgage, if you pay that off earlier, you avoid interest payments. And so the plan that we're on now is to pay off in 17 years. That will save taxpayers $38 million. And so that's money that can be freed up for direct services rather than interest.
Ms. Diaz, does that include also the trust that we established so that we could do investment? And I'll let you explain that because I think that was important. That was a real important decision we made.
Yes, thank you. There's two key ways that we're helping to pay down that obligation. One is by sending money directly to CalPERS and paying off certain schedules that are accruing over time. The other is we've set aside money into a trust, and initially it was around $10, $11 million. We've continued to add money to that, and because it's been invested, it has grown. So it's now at about $27 million. We're recommending that we continue to contribute to that we not dip into that for the next few years. But in the latter years, we will draw on those funds just like we would have other outside revenues like property tax or sales tax. These would be funds we've generated that have grown over time that will help us with paying those steeper payments a few years from now. So that's one way we've been trying to prepare for that obligation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I guess I'll ask Mr. Jaw about, several people have mentioned cleaning streets and sidewalks. Is it necessary if it's at the expense of the repair of our streets and sidewalks? So I know we do it all, and we have budgets for each. Would Mr. Jaw like to expand on that a bit to give people comfort that we are doing street repair and sidewalk repair, and that also we have a hotline that people can call in and things can get addressed right away if they do report it?
Thank you, Mayor Howard. So I'd like to take it like a two different approach for the sidewalk related issue. If it is residents see any defect on sidewalk, they can immediately send it through the My RWC app, or they're calling Public Works Services directly, and they can report about sidewalk defects. And then Public Works staff will immediately get onto it and then repair it as soon as possible. For the long-term solution, if it is a single family resident can participate in Redwood City 50-50 cost sharing sidewalk replacement program. That program is currently well funded, and then we've been replacing about 120 to 200 sidewalk location per year. So it is available. It is very cost effective for the resident, and they only have to participate for 50% of the cost, and city will take it from there. So those are the available options that we have. If it is commercial building or the multifamily apartments, please let us know, and we will work with the business owner to make sure they improve their sidewalk related issue. I hope that's another question.
And Mayor, if I may clarify too, in terms of the specific recommendations shown in the report that talk about homelessness and healthy streets, that's actually money that has been earmarked in the past to help us when we are trying to address impacts associated with encampments. So previously, in particular, before we set up the safe parking program, we were having significant problems with dumping on streets. And so we kind of created a program called Healthy Streets that was meant to really address that issue. It wasn't, just cleaning sidewalks throughout the city or something like that. We may or may not need more funding for that sort of cleanup. We'd like to ask for the proposed funds at this time so that we can pull that all together, pull the staff together related to homelessness support. So of course, we want to focus most of that money on getting people into housing, but we also know, and the city often hears from residents who are concerned about encampments, and it does cost city revenue in order to be able to address the impacts on the rest of the community when those encampments are addressed. So, so when we talk about the Healthy Streets program, that's what is intended.
Thank you. That was my next question. Thank you so much for clarifying that the monies being used are all necessary. I wanted to let people know that the app is free. You can download it on your phone. It's called My RWC. If you go to the city's website, it will tell you how to download that app. It's really very helpful for graffiti, sidewalks, street potholes, anything that you might find of that nature. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. So thank you. Those were some questions I thought that we could answer before we got started. So now I'd like to ask the City Council if they would like to discuss any items or address the questions that are before you on the screen. Councilmember Espinoza Garnica.
Yeah, hi. So thank you for the presentation, Michelle, for presenting, and for city staff for the report. I would like to give my feedback and general recommendations. Well, overall, I'd like to see something that's partnering a lot more in the future when it comes to addressing our budget for departments. I think it was a good idea that a couple members of spoke about having study sessions or multiple hearings on the budgeting for different departments and not just policing, but especially for policing, I think that ought to be raised. And also in our budgets, staff reports, in particular to policing, I think it'd be very important to have perspectives that are also much more on the abolitionist
perspective as well. I think we ought to have a diversity of the perspective. And I think a lot of the calls, well, I know that the calls for defunding are mainly to create society where police are obsolete. And in order to have abolition, it'll take a long while. It's a gradual system that also incorporates not just a removal of security, but further realization, really, for all of us that policing further criminalizes poverty and being without housing and substance abuse and the like mental health illness, mental illness. So I would like to see the city consult with abolitionists or coalition and orgs similar to ones like the Anti-Terror Police Project or like in Oakland that they have toolkits. I think what we ought to see in our city is also a way of like I would like to see alternatives that are also community-based models as well, like much more radical than before, which would mean that I think it would include having workshops for our residents to know how to deal with an overdose, emergency intervention, to also replacing police and security guards with a number of, let's see, I had some notes. So I think we ought to have some increasing in the presence of youth workers, patient navigators, and greeters in high traffic areas of shared spaces instead of police for this reason. For the reason that, you know, the youth and those that are institutionalized, those that spend time in shelters or in clinics are often penalized much more swiftly and quickly by security and police because they're so highly policed. These spaces, like, you know, we have police at the RV parking lot. So I think what we ought to do is try to invest in community models that tries to find security by increasing the number of workers and service providers than trying to increase our police presence. And I would like to see more broad perspective brought into our discussion because I think we're failing to also consider the very viable option of this step towards abolition, which creates safer society by, as other members in the audience said, a safer society that prevents harm, so teaches about harm and oppression, and also invests in resources that help uplift our marginalized folks. So in securing funding for housing, securing housing to have also affordable and free housing, to having after-school programs and resources that are outside of the policing model. So those are all things I'd like to have be added into consideration for our reports. I'm also curious to know how much we can defund the police in the next year. Like, is there a 50% defunding possibility? Is there 30% defunding possibility when we consider it this way? You know, again, not to leave us without any security measures, but defunding the police in order to invest in community reallocation into resources. So those are my main ideas as well. And I wanted to bring something up about unrelated to policing, also about sewers, because I talked with the manager about this, and I don't know if it's an appropriate time now, but if I can, I just wanted to raise also a question about our rates for the sewage. If we can also look at the fees to be different for our residents by based on, because currently if you live, say, in like in a duplex or a triplex, each unit would have to pay the same fee for the sewage, though there could be different amount of people in each unit. So there could be like one person in each 2 units and 5 people in another unit. They'd each be paying the same flat rate for their sewer, and at the same time they're sharing their sewage. So I know I just said a lot, but those are the things that I wanted to bring up. I wanted to see if we could look at our sewage prices differently, our police differently, if we can have more sessions with the public to talk about the way we budget and what we invest in, so that can increase engagement of our folks and, you know, the comprehension of what we do prioritize as a city and staff, and just to have greater perspective. So I think those are my points. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Espinoza Garnica. Ms. Diaz, I'm sorry, you had your hand raised?
Just for one quick point, I just wanted to clarify, we don't have police assigned at the safe parking lot. So I'm not sure where that understanding came from. I know the other topics are policy topics council may wish to discuss, and I appreciate that you'd asked questions about the sewer rates, and I know that Director Jha will also be following up with you on that as well.
Oh, okay, my apologies on that. Perhaps we have security there. It was just to deliver a point that we have, you know, our own community centers, and these places like the homeless centers are much more. They have a lot more security presence, and so in these spaces, they're a lot more likely to police and security a lot more to exhibit punishment and expel folks in these spaces. So that's why I'm advocating for those models. But I understand. Thank you for clarifying.
Would any other council members like to address the questions on the screen? Vice Mayor Hale.
Thank you. My computer is exceedingly slow these days, so and my internet is as well, so bear with me as it's been going in and out all day.
No problem.
Thank you. First of all, I do want to say thank you to staff. What really struck me looking through this report was actually how close your estimations were to the original estimates that were made. Earlier budget discussions, it was like very difficult to model these numbers. And I think, you know, we got reasonably close. And I also found interesting the legislation change that changes the downtown tax structure due to redevelopment. And I wasn't aware of that. So I'd love to learn more about that. No need to comment now, but it would be perhaps nice to follow up with more information about that. And I find it curious, but would like to learn a bit more. I had a few comments and questions. First of all, for the homeless programs, how do we think about these as being long-term? Are they long-term housing opportunities, or are they like conceived of as being long-term needed programs, or, you know, getting at the root of the problem? Or could you explain more? And I think, you know, just echoing some of the comments I heard from the community, I fully understand that this is not the budget meeting, that we're doing an adjustment, not the budget. And so you'll come back with programs, but any sort of previews you could get around that you could give us around where you were going with that, I think might be helpful.
So one of the, I guess, big places I was going is we have been over the last couple of years sticking our toes into the waters of directly addressing homelessness in a way we never have. So for many years, our approach was to support what the county does, and there are great programs and resources that they offer, and we complemented that, but we didn't particularly develop our own programs or put in substantial additional funding. But that's been changing, and that's been changing with the RV safe parking program. That's been changing with support for the Downtown Streets program. It's clear in this time, you barely have to look around. We all know we are only seeing escalating problems with homelessness. So frankly, you know, we still need to talk about what we might recommend to you in terms of details. How do we break up those funds to immediate needs versus, you know, more permanent housing versus the impacts on the rest of the community associated with encampments? But to me, it just seemed really clear that that was the top need in our community beyond the immediate COVID response, some of which is really importantly helping to avoid homelessness by the rent assistance.
Okay, so that's helpful, but not fully sort of, it might be too soon, but I guess what I'm saying is, are we thinking tiny homes? Are we thinking rental subsidies to keep people housed? Are we thinking, do you have any sort of sense of where the budget might go? And then again, because it was earmarked as long-term, do we anticipate this being an annual line item?
So I framed it as long-term more because this has become a long-term problem, and it's one that developed over the long term, right? You know, the situations we've been seeing throughout the state around homelessness were not recent or particularly unique. So we shouldn't think that they will be, you know, short-term in terms of being resolved. I'd really like to spend some more time with staff on the particular programs. I think it could be a whole mix of things in terms of what we bring forward. And I've asked staff to start thinking about that. You know, we actually just closed the books fairly recently. And so really having my head wrapped around how much money we might have available and how to spread it around programs, we've had pretty limited time to get into those details. So we'd like a little more time and to come back to you later this spring. At the same time, if council has, you know, particular areas that you think we should be focused on and we should think about for those funds, we'd be glad to hear those.
Great, that's great. I'm very pleased to see that. I think safe parking solved a particular slice of homelessness, not solved either, but it addressed it and it met a need in the community. But there's clearly a larger need around homelessness, and particularly homeless encampments. And I'm delighted to see us investing more time and effort into that. I also wanted to ask about Vision Zero, which is a topic we've had previously and even through previous councils, and that's going to be coming back to council, I believe, this year. I've had a difficulty understanding where we plan to invest dollars into making these policies real. Can you just speak at a high level to where we would anticipate seeing that, or would we anticipate seeing that following our next hearing or study session on that in the budget?
So I'm going to call a friend on this and ask for either Community Development Director Mark Munzer or other staff to help with addressing that.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, Vice Mayor Hale, members of City Council. I will ask for Jessica's assistance. A high level for Vision Zero, we don't have an account per se. We pull from various traffic safety program funding in order to fund the Vision Zero initiative. Right now it's about, and Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong, about $1.3 million allocated to implementing Vision Zero. Of course, we are wrapping up working with getting a consultant on board, as you referenced, a study session coming up in the spring with City Council, and as that gets more flushed out, we can, you know, have further conversations about how we allocate funding to Vision Zero in the future.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we'll have the opportunity to weigh in on that and then to bring the plan to life, because I know it was sort of discussed conceptually, and now I think what the desire was to really get a plan on paper so that we would have something to hold ourselves accountable to and to share with the community. And then a couple of suggestions for future budgeting processes. So just under bucket number 4, participatory budgeting. It came up at a previous hearing on this topic. I did a bit of research on it, and you know, while I wouldn't envision, you know, doing it for the entire budget, I think building that muscle within the community where we set aside perhaps a portion of our budget and we really get the community involved in how we want to invest those funds, I think would be great. Not only for helping to educate the community on how the budget's structured, but really deeply getting that feedback of where we want these public dollars spent. So I would love to see that integrated into a future budget cycle. And then I'm also curious if we have the ability to do any sort of visualization of budget by neighborhood or by geography within the city. I don't know the extent of our software capabilities, but certainly we did get some questions on where funds being spent and invested across the city. I don't know if that's already done by department, but certainly would find that interesting. Is that something that we have within our current capabilities?
So Perhaps to a limited extent. There could be some ways that we could, through our GIS system, be able to illustrate some kinds of expenditures. I would say one context to keep in mind is, some of our initiatives are part of multi-year plans. Good examples are our utility master plan, or pavement management. We look citywide, we look where's the pavement the worst, where will be the most impact of replacing. And so year by year, it's not necessarily going to be spread out evenly throughout the city, but it's going to be according to a plan. And we've encouraged through some of the council's policy, since moving to district elections, to continue to think about citywide needs. So at this point, we haven't invested time, energy, software into depictions more on a neighborhood basis.
Okay, well, maybe there would be the opportunity to do that in some, for some of these programs, to just look at how are they distributed, and then just ask ourselves why. Is it because the infrastructure is so much older in this part of the city, or what? I think that's certainly, it sounds like information that the community may crave. And then to the other questions, I'll just say again, budget is an expression of values, and I feel really grateful that Redwood City is in a position to be able to distribute more funds to our community when they most need them. And so I'm very much in support of the distribution of the funds. I'm so supportive of the initiatives we have going right now, particularly delighted to see that our firefighters have not only received the vaccine, but are even helping to give the vaccine out. Is just so wonderful, and such a sign of hope and encouragement that we'll be able to get through this pandemic. So thank you so much to Melissa and Michelle, and to the entire staff who worked on preparing this budget.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Hale. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. And I want to say thank you to city staff for the comprehensive report that you provided. And I also want to say congratulations on the clean audits. I think for, I think the third or fourth time in a row, maybe more. Truly a testament to the financial prudence that is being guided through the city's leadership. So I appreciate that. So I do have a number of questions. And then I have a few comments that I'll share. So the first line of questioning is in the kind of what I would call general bucket. So my first question is, the staff report points out at several points that the city uses a conservative budgeting forecasting framework, which of course has led to this very comfortable financial position we see ourselves in. But I could also see that conservative financial approach creating some trade-offs in terms of the services that we offer our community members. I'm just wondering, what is the kind of framework or rationale that city staff brings to deciding between safety versus investment for our city?
So I'll take a start at that and then invite either Michelle or to Derek to add on as well. I think when we're thinking about what projections to make, we are thinking about the consequences of being wrong. And especially when we think about adding ongoing services, I'm particularly looking for a high degree of certainty that I can count on the revenue to be able to offer an expanded service for a long period of time. And so this is where having our 10-year budget forecast has really been helpful in providing some background to understand that we face these gaps ahead. And that's why we've often looked at these shorter term, limited period investments until we get more confidence that the budget will be able to sustain adding that in as part of a regular operating budget. A good example of that recently was asking the council for support for hiring the equity and inclusion officer position. It's framed as a 2-year position with some funding for consulting services. And tonight we're asking for more funding related to those initiatives. I could see that becoming part of the regular budget within a few years, but right now we've still got deficits to work through. So that's kind of at a management level, the perspective I'm thinking about. But Michelle or Derek, if there's anything more to add, please do.
Okay, great. Actually, that leads me to my second question, kind of in the general category, which is obviously you lengthened the period of forecasting to 10 years. which I think presents some opportunities, but also potentially challenges. And I'm wondering, in the development of this kind of updated budget proposal for the remainder of the fiscal year, did you see that lengthening of the forecasting time period creating kind of maybe differences in terms of the discussion or decision making that was happening with that budget update, or not? I'm just kind of curious about that framing of that.
Well, I think so. I found it really helpful. I think it was helpful to the council at the time. In particular, I'm much more confident of the expenditure increases over time. Sadly, those are much more known, particularly when it comes to the pension obligations. We knew we were facing big increases, and until you kind of look those in the eye, can you really decide, are we ready to invest new revenues in services or to paying off debts? And what is the right balance for doing that? I think when it comes to revenues, we all have a lot of humility about that. We do the best we can with a lot of support from professional experts. And yet, we're in these unprecedented economic times. So I would never say we're super confident about all 10 years of those revenue forecasts, but pretty confident actually in the expenditures.
Got it. But would you say kind of conceptually, it kind of helped to cement this kind of conservative framework for budget development?
I think so. I think it provides a longer term perspective on obligations so that we're not surprised, and so that we don't make decisions about service expansions that we can't sustain.
Okay, great. So I want to move on, really trying to get through these questions, but I do have several of them. So of course, there's been a concerted effort to pay down the city's unfunded pension liability, which I believe makes good financial sense. But in the time of a kind of crisis like COVID, I'm wondering if you can talk about what guides the city in terms of its prioritization of these unfunded pension liabilities, moving forward. Specifically, I know that we're committing approximately $275,000 to this kind of accelerated repayment program. I'm curious, what was the rationale behind keeping that when we're in kind of the midst of a crisis?
So I guess I'm trying to have the best of both worlds in terms the forecast continues on that 17-year payoff of obligations so that we can realize those taxpayer savings, that $38 million. The difference is, if this were not a pandemic year and we had a $12 million balance, I would have come to the council with 80% of that going to pension and other liabilities and only 20% for council priorities, community needs. But that's not the case. All of that is going toward either sustaining through next year's budget or to needs present right now. So all of it is going to community needs. Again, we have a 15% reserve and we haven't had to dip into that. So I feel financially responsible in recommending that to you. But that's also something I'm only doing because of the magnitude of the economic crisis right now.
And I appreciate that flexibility. That leads me into another question about expenditures. So obviously, you have these categories of expenditure that you've identified. I'm wondering how those numbers were come to. So specifically for the equity program is $350,000. You had the program for small businesses of $450,000. What was the kind of process that you came to in developing those numbers?
There were several different factors. So for the small business support, for example, initially we were inspired, could we match what CZI did? And then we thought, well, maybe that's not exactly where we want the money to go. Maybe we'd like it to go to a broader set of businesses. Maybe we'd like it to go to things other than restaurant support, for example. And so, we fit in a little bit more. Really, the different funding areas are really reflective of what do we think at this point in time our most urgent needs. So it's management discretion at this point of trying to balance that out and to think about, what will have the most important impact for our residents in getting us through the next year, really essentially of this most dramatic trough in revenues.
Great. My last question about expenditure is a little bit of a particular tactical area. So am I correct that because of COVID-19, we were delayed in the implementation of an ERP system, which is costing us $525,000?
The delay is costing $500,000. And Michelle, if you could speak to that more.
Yes, I'd be happy to. We extended the go live date for the ERP implementation by a year, and that involved a significant increase in the cost of our consulting support for the program by keeping our consulting firm on for an additional year.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in exploring that number, specifically because I think that given the nature of kind of what I would call this force majeure or act of God with COVID-19, how we can think about kind of coming to some middle ground on this $525,000 number, because it's very significant in my opinion, especially for the implementation of an ERP. I don't know what the contract looks like. I haven't looked at it, obviously. But I would imagine there's some consideration for this type of happening. So I would just encourage city staff to be looking at that, because that, those funds can be used to enhance city services for, residents of our community. And I guess my final question is just about the climate action plan. So similar to Vice Mayor Hale's point about safe streets, I don't see the climate action plan codified in budget investment. I'm wondering if you could talk about what the rationale behind that is, and how we can look moving forward with the climate action plan.
And I'll kick this off, and then I'll ask Terrence for some additional information. So there is actually $500,000 that we're asking to be allocated for climate adaptation initiatives. And that's not out of last year's balance. It was appropriation from previous to that. And we've recently formed a staff level climate adaptation team that's intended in part to help us make sure that our services are well positioned through impacts associated with climate change. Separately, we have a climate action plan and a number of steps to move that forward. And I didn't have a chance to ask TK for specific dollar amounts associated with that, but perhaps he can help with that now, or we can get back to you.
Thank you, Melissa. I can come back to you detail with the exact amount of it, but at this moment, the interdepartmental climate adaptation teams develops, and we are developing the various initiatives according with our climate action plans. So that our climate action plan is to reduce the greenhouse gas certain amount by 2030. Those plans require the community involvement, interdepartmental involvement, and then a collaboration with the other agencies. So those are the steps that currently we are working on.
Great. I appreciate it, Director Kwa. So I just have some final comments. So number one, I'd of course, again, like to repeat my thanks to city staff for doing this tour de force effort. Again, your prowess in your financial management is very obvious. And so I'd like to thank you for that. Your conservative approach to budgeting obviously has put us into a position that feels comfortable, especially in light of the COVID-19 crisis, which as a new council person feels good, especially as a new council person on the Finance and Audit Committee. So I want to thank you for that. But I do want to push a little bit on the city to be thinking in more of a framed way about our conservative approach versus our investment approach to budgeting. I do think that maintaining a conservative stance on our budgeting is critical. However, I do think that, we wade into kind of a conundrum that many community servicing organizations constantly face. What is the appropriate balance of retained earnings or reserves that we should be maintaining? And I really want us to think about that actively as we kind of start to move forward. Of course, this is an interesting kind of dilemma considering the crisis, but it is something that we're going to have to continue to contend with. The fact that we had kind of this large operating balance, I think is emblematic of that. I wouldn't be surprised, to be quite honest, if we had an operating balance at the end of the next fiscal year, although your projection says otherwise. So it's something that I'm really wanting to kind of just encourage the staff to be looking at actively. I also believe that there's an opportunity to develop an approach to budget allocation that represents, time-based community priorities. For example, I'm not necessarily convinced that $350,000 for the equity program is sufficient, nor do I think an allocation of $450,000 for small business enablement and support is sufficient either. I'd love to, again, take a more rigorous approach to understanding what those budget allocations could be develop a framework and share that framework with the community as well as the council. As for the unfunded pension liabilities, I really think that it's critical that we start to develop, again, a framework for understanding our need to accelerate payments for unfunded pension liabilities in light of a crisis. You know, this is unlike a crisis we've ever seen, but it strikes me that putting the funds towards solving the issues that residents are concerned about in relationship to this crisis is critically important, and may be critically important over the benefits that they would receive from the accelerated payments of unfunded pension liabilities. And then finally, I really do want to encourage the city staff to really be thinking again in a full-throated and fulsome way about the reimagining component of the budgeting. We've heard from many city and residents here today that we want to see a reimagining of public safety and public services. And I think, of course, we should be thinking about how we can codify this into our budget so that we are moving forward with a kind of progressive lens that everyone in the community is asking for. So thank you so much for all of that. I really appreciate your responses to my questions, and I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Reddy.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I'm grateful to follow both Vice Mayor Hale and Councilmember Smith. Those were really great questions. And I echo Vice Mayor Hale's being in awe of how close staff was to calculating both the expenditures and the revenues this last year. I think that was really amazing. And I'm grateful that the somewhat, windfall that we got at the end of the year was not going to be used, is not being recommended for paying down the unfunded pension liability. We do have very serious issues this year, and so I am grateful that staff is recommending that we use it for those other things that are really important. Perhaps it would be helpful for the community to note that homeless people are not one thing, that the Downtown Streets team works with what advocates refer to as chronically homeless. And it's the idea, it's a program cleaning the streets and engaging chronically homeless in an activity of cleaning streets and helping the city is a way to raise self-esteem, of giving them something to do that is supporting the city. And that's one group of homeless. Another group are people who've already lost their housing and are living in RVs. That group has been served by the city with its safe parking program. We also the city has been extremely generous in helping people pay for their rents that they can't afford. So these are different categories of homeless that the city wisely is understanding, and this budget represents how flexible the city has been in understanding these different phases of homelessness. The chronically homeless who have been homeless for years, maybe decades, very newly homeless who have just lost their housing and they're living in RVs, and those who are in danger of facing homelessness because they're not able to pay their rent. This budget represents all three of those categories. And I just wanted to lift that up and say how proud I am of this city for using its abundance in this way to recognize those different faces of homelessness. I agree with those speakers who suggested that they would like to have public hearings about the budget, and particularly to highlight how the money is spent by different departments. I know that one of the issues that has impressed me as a city council member is how amazing our different departments are and how they work together so well. That the leadership in our departments interact with each other, they seek support from each other. They are often doing things, they will not make a decision without checking with other directors to see about the support of others. And I think it would be helpful for our community to know that through our budget and the way that our departments spend their money, and maybe use that as a lens into the flawless way that that our departments work together, and how the leadership is so creative and flexible during this very difficult time. I other than the suggestion about the public hearing, I don't have any other feedback. I do completely support the overall strategy in the 21-22 budget, and am proud of the, as again Vice Mayor Hale mentioned, the budget is a demonstration of our values, and I think that this budget does absolutely demonstrate our values. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Council Member Reddy. Council Member G.
Thank you, Mayor Howard, and thank you to the staff for the presentation. I think it was a great overview and more importantly, a lot of hard work, because this is a challenging time that we're living in. Ms. Stevenson-Diaz and Ms. Flaherty, I think one of the biggest challenges in budgeting, particularly for a government agency, is making decisions on information, particularly financial information that's not coming in real time, particularly on the revenue side. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because we get monies from a lot of different fund sources, and that doesn't always show up at the month-end report. I mean, you're forecasting, you're talking to experts, but the decisions we get based on financial information is a combination of real expenses, I think, and forecasted revenue, but it's not real time. The money's coming in cash basis. So can you talk about how that all works and how you bring that information forward to the council?
So I'd like to put our financial services manager on the spot for this, mostly because he deserves some more limelight than I've given him tonight. Derek, would you mind sharing a little bit more about the timing of when we get major revenues and how we know?
Sure. Property tax, certain revenues we do know, usually pretty good idea of what we're going to get. But sales tax, for instance, is one that can take up to 3 months from the time.
Actually, Derek, can you move just a little closer? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry about that.
Is
this better, hopefully?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So property tax, we do know, and we get our large distributions of property tax in December and April-ish, right around the time taxpayers pay. But for sales tax and other like TOT, those are all delayed. Those can be delayed up to 3 months by the time we get information on what we think we're going to get, and when we actually receive the money in the banks could be 3 months. So sales tax is a good example of that. And so there is a delay, and we do use consultants to kind of help with the forecasting, but there is, like I said, up to a 3-month delay in some of those revenues, especially sales tax is the largest one, which is 20% of our operating revenue.
And one thing I do want to call out, when we started in the pandemic, we had a concerted effort to reach out to our top sales tax generators to try to understand more in real time what they were seeing, what they were expecting. So we didn't wait for the quarterly report. We did take the initiative to check in with them about it. And then some things just surprise us. Vice Mayor Hale mentioned interest related to downtown property tax. That's a fairly recent legal decision, and it was not a good surprise to get, but that's where we're at now.
No, and Derek, thank you. I appreciate the hard work, because unfortunately we don't dictate how fast the Board of Equalization moves, and a 3-month delay isn't unusual in getting our sales tax receipts, which makes it really hard for us then to collectively pivot if there is actually real negative news. and then to take action, because we're trying to play catch up. If your forecasts or for some reason off or something doesn't happen correctly. But thank you for the hard work, because it's really very different for city government versus maybe private business where you're not getting real-time financial information. I think, Michelle, I think you mentioned something about our CalPERS kind of lowering the rate of return faster than we can make a contribution. Has there been any conversation? I know politically it's probably not a good time for them to do this, but adjusting their ROI to a more realistic return. I mean, I look at my mentor on this as Jeff Ira, and he and I still don't believe the ROI that CalPERS has put forward is real. It was more of a political negotiation, and that the real number is probably around 5%. But what is the conversation at CalPERS going over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of ROI? And I would assume it's not going to be higher than what it is now.
You're exactly right, council member. There's been a lot of conversation around that, around what does CalPERS own actuary recommend to CalPERS and what does the CalPERS board decide? And they were estimating 7.2% rate of return, and then most recently stepped it down to 7. Their actuary had suggested it might be closer to 6.2 at one point, or 6.5. So this is one of the reasons we try to plan a bit conservatively, because if CalPERS doesn't meet its estimate, then we end up having to pay the difference. So for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, when fiscal year FY 2019-20 closed, the CalPERS rate of return was only 4.5%. So we were looking at the difference between that and 7, which is what they had originally calculated our payments at. So we would have had to make up the difference on that. Fortunately, it's coming in above right now because the stock market is doing so well. But as you know, that's very volatile and unpredictable.
Is there a cycle for the next formal adjustment or review of their ROI?
They've announced they're planning on stepping it down. Derek, do you know when the next one is scheduled?
Yeah, so they have what they call the asset liability management cycle that meets every 4 years to discuss it, and they're just starting this month, February, and they'll have a decision in November if anything changes. They're basically looking at their strategy and if they would need to make any changes. And so this is the 4th year. This is their time in the cycle, and so we'll know more in November. Obviously we don't know yet anything. We don't know which way they're leaning, but we'll see.
Well, all the more reason to be sort of conservative, or at least to have a reserve in case they step it down more than we anticipate. There were a number of comments this evening about infrastructure, what I would consider infrastructure. So I believe, Melissa, that is our April discussion when the capital improvement budget comes forward.
Yes, we'll be ready for a more comprehensive discussion.
Right, thank you. One of the things I would want to make sure that in that conversation or after this evening is that we are not putting off any maintenance or critical infrastructure that may result in a catastrophic failure. And so as we look to that April discussion to make sure that that is kind of included and addressed. I mean, it's amazing that, in the work I do, while we're coming up on almost a year of the public health emergency, when buildings aren't used for a year, turning things back on aren't the same as, they don't always turn back on. And so we want to make sure, or I'd like to make sure that everything's working and that when we really need to turn things on, that they work, particularly during a pandemic. But my hat's off, I think, as several of my colleagues have shared, great work. It's a lot of hard work given the moment in time we're at. While I would like to see more money go into paying off our pension liabilities, we are in an emergency and your recommendations are appropriate to take care of the moment, but let's not take our eye off the 5-10 years, because it's the next generation that will be paying for any shortcomings that we make now in terms of liabilities in our retirement. I think that's about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member G. Council Member Aguirre.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, when I looked at these budgets, the first thing I think of is what am I going to do that's going to benefit our children for future years in our budgets. And that's always a question in the back of my mind. And I always appreciated the fact that previous councils and mayors have really looked at having healthy reserves and making sure our city moves forward. So first of all, I want to thank the community for all their input and questions that they've brought to us, and also the staff for their hard work. And it brings me to a question of what can we do as a council or as a city to make sure that our community understands our budget process? You know, can we share videos? Can we do webinars before our June budget? Can we have a, you know, off council meeting study sessions for the general public? Because it is a challenging, it's like when you look at all the budgets and all the pieces that there are, what is CIP? What is the capital improvement? What is the different budgets? What is the TOT? You know, there's so many, it's very confusing, I think, in general. So I'd like to see us have it be more transparent and actually more understandable. And it is confusing, and Derek can, you know, attest to it. He's finance person. I see him at all the meetings that I go to. He's been amazing to work with, but it's a challenge. So I'd like to see if we can look into that. And I'm sure there's opportunities and something we don't have to reinvent that we can maybe share on our website or think about how we share this with the community so that when we make decisions, the public understands, but they're also part of the process. You know, how can they have input? Where is the input appropriate? One of the things I wanted to ask is we've had, right now I understand we have a 15% reserve. Is this the lowest we've gone in our reserves? Because again, I'm looking to the future, and I don't want to make sure, even though we've gone through a tough year, that we've set the stage so that in the future we don't have to cut services or programs that are essential to our community as we make these budget decisions. So is this the lowest we've gone in our reserves?
I'm going to ask Derek if he can help with that. I think for a couple of years, we might have been right at the 15% like we would be at this point. Often we have been above.
Correct. Yeah. This is, we have a little cushion over the 15% right now, but it'd be prior, a couple of years ago, we were in the 15 to 20% range. So we're down towards the lower end, I would say right now.
Okay. So one of the things that has come up with a lot of the speakers were the high sidewalk repairs. I want to know how we prioritize that, and what do we do in communities where you don't have the opportunity for the homeowner to really be part of the 50-50 because it's maybe apartments and duplexes, and it's a challenge. What kind of services do we have for those communities that have sidewalks that are not as nice at other neighborhoods where we can be a part of, like adjusting or working with those? Again, with maybe it's a property owner but has a number of duplexes, apartments, and I want to make sure that there's a how in other words, my question is, how do we prioritize that? And what do we do in certain communities that the need is higher and perhaps the income isn't as high in those neighborhoods?
So Terrence, would you like to address that? We've talked a little bit about the differences with single family homes, but I understand that's not so much the question here.
Certainly, Melissa. So with question with the sidewalk in the certain area, based on the situation, maybe the sidewalk is damaged by the tree that from the public right of way. We have a 100% replacement program that we fund for the sidewalk replacement. As for the multifamily residents, we will have to work with the property owner to make sure that they replace sidewalk, because of that the sidewalks are the property of the adjacent property owner, so that they are responsible to replace it. So if caused by some sort of city related utilities or activities, we are going to replace it for 100% with no cost to the property owner.
And that's replacement. And as TK noted earlier, if there's a repair that's needed, we always encourage residents to let us know a repair is needed, and we'll take care of a repair. The replacement obviously is a bigger, more expensive, longer term fix.
I guess I'm looking for an equitable process that helps communities that don't have the resources to be part of the 50-50 program and be able to still have a safe place with ADA improvements and, children and bicycles. So that's where my question is leading to. My last question is, now that we've been able to transfer the library to the county, are there any savings that are reflected in this budget, or is it too soon as far as what the city is going to be saving on that transfer of the library services to the county?
And there is no near-term savings on that. It's a very modest, and in the longer term, we'll have a little bit of savings because ultimately there will be fewer staff and so fewer ongoing obligations. But it's not a near-term savings. It is, though, kind of an example of this step process we have towards reimagining services. So in this case, it's the Fair Oaks Library. I would say, additionally, the work we're doing with the mental health pilot program is a step at reimagining services, and we'll be having more of those discussions over the coming years. It's really a matter of we're focused now mostly on pandemic response and recovery, but reimagining is not far off.
And are the staff going to be able to be part of other libraries, or are we going to be cutting positions?
No, we expect that those staff will be able to be reassigned to other parts of the library system. And then ultimately, as we have retirements, then the positions won't be refilled.
Thank you. In regards to the questions that are before us, I think that in my opinion, it is that I support the overall strategy. I am appreciative of all the work that went into it, the fact that we have some reserves to do certain things that we want and that the community needs. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to finalize a lot of these things in June and come back with what it really looks like. One of the questions that I had was when I think it was mentioned earlier that we had to wait for 2028, 2029 for TOT. To come back to our revenues. And I was wondering why it was going to take so long. I mean, this, you're thinking about 7 or 8 years when we've heard all the recovery is going to take about 4 years for a lot of the cities and a lot of, states in general in our nation to recover from this pandemic. Why is TOT going to take that much longer?
I think mostly what we've heard from economists is that leisure travel and business travel will be kind of the last things that people are ready to spend money on. Or maybe you're willing to do driving trips, but less likely to go further away to fly places, for example. We'd be glad to be wrong, but we have heard that from several economists that the travel industry is going to be one of the last to return. And I know that's what, say SFO is predicting as well. It's 4 to 5 years away.
So do we think we're being a little conservative and perhaps we'll get a nice surprise?
I don't know that we're being overly conservative on that one, but
okay.
It is possible. Again, we've never recovered from a pandemic, so it's kind of hard to predict, how that recovery will look.
If I could build on that, part of what we're hearing from various corners is not only is leisure travel expected to come back slowly, but also business travel, because remote work may be maintained in part for a lot of white collar jobs, and so business travel may be done less because less in-person meetings are occurring, not just in terms of the commute, but in terms of business travel. So as the Zoom meeting replaces the in-person meeting, you don't jump on the flight and travel across country or around the world to do your in-person meetings as much either. So those are some of the estimates that the pundits are forecasting.
I actually heard that in a news report this morning about how business travel is going to look very differently now that folks have figured out a different way of doing it that is actually ending up with good outcomes. Well, I just want to thank again the staff and the community for their input on this, and I look forward to our budget at the in June, and looking for a lot of community input, or at least understanding how we come up with our budget, because it is a complicated process. Thank you.
And I realized too, I wish I had remembered one other thing to share to your question related to sidewalk repairs. We have set aside $500,000 and are spending that this year on curb cuts, so sidewalk access or improved disability access. And that is the location of those repairs this year is in some of our less advantaged neighborhoods. So that is part of work that's already underway. And with the recommendations, there'd be more funding towards ADA transition plan, again, meeting the needs of folks' ability to access services.
It's such an important thing. I really appreciate that, Melissa. My 90-year-old dad, when I took him on a ride or pushed him on his wheelchair, and he knew exactly what the sidewalks looked like as we were going down his neighborhood, and said, no, you got to turn back. That one's going to give me a big bump. No, go to the next one. And I realized what a challenge that is. And if you're not in a wheelchair, you're not disabled, the challenge that is, and how we need to look at sidewalks in so many different ways for children, for bicycles, for a lot of things.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Aguirre. I want to thank the council for all these excellent questions. It's really been quite a conversation. I wanted to add when Councilmember Aguirre asked about the transit occupancy tax, we also have a void because the county bought 2 hotels and have taken permanently off our rolls our transit occupancy tax, which I think is at almost $800,000 per year. Is there any progress in working with the county to help supplement and replace that money that we will have lost?
There is progress, but I don't have anything final to report at this point. But yes, I have been in discussions with the county manager. I would say that I'm hopeful that there will be something that we can share. I would also say it's unusual and or unprecedented for a county to reimburse a city for that kind of revenue loss.
Well, I'd like to be the first.
Sure, and I'm asking for it.
Let's start a trend. First of all, I'd like to thank our staff. Everyone there, Michelle, Derek, I mean, I could just keep going on and on and on. Thank you so much for this document. It is so clear. And even though I found there's a lot of information, you really worked at trying to make it clear and easy to understand. And Melissa, thank you for your notes that you kept sending us in explanation of certain areas so that we could break it down and digest it a lot better. I really appreciate that. Made it so much easier for me to figure out. So I do understand when council members say maybe there's something we could do in the future to engage the community, and whether it be a webinar or some kind of meeting, it would be kind of interesting to see if we could do it in some small way. I'm not talking about the overall budget. I just think that would be too much work for staff, and it would certainly not help us achieve all the other things we need to accomplish. However, in the future, maybe we start thinking about one area where we'd like to have the public help us plan and give them a certain amount of money and see how that works out. I think that would be worth investing in the future, not right away. It's certainly not right now during COVID. I just feel there's already enough we have on our plate. But for the future, I think that would be quite an interesting exercise to do. I'd like to thank you for investing in IT and tech upgrades. I know that it's not the sexiest thing we do in Redwood City for some people. Some people it is, but I know how important it is. And I am so glad that you've made a good investment in the tech upgrades. Just our meetings alone seem to get smoother and smoother each time. So I am glad that you did that, and thank you for pointing that out, because it's so very important these days for us to stay on top of the IT advances that we need to have to run a good city. I like the money that to assist small businesses. I'm very pleased, but I think that we should also thank our partners, because some people said to me, well, that's not a lot of money and maybe there should be more. And I'd like to remind them that we have other partners that we're all helping the small businesses. CZI has been a tremendous benefit. The Redwood City Improvement Association, the Downtown Business Group, the Chamber, SAMCETA. We have great partners, and we shouldn't be looking to try to fund the whole thing because we have to be sure we balance carefully and fairly. So I think it's important for us to continue to thank our partners for the contributions they make to offset some of the money that we can use for other things. Thank you for putting the money in, seed money in for the Redwood Shores Levee and the Inner Harbor Recreation Area. I know it'll take a lot more money to do those, but if it gets the plans started and we start looking at other ways to find funding for these two projects, I was pleased to see it there. It keeps it on our radar so we don't forget. Thank you for your plan for economic stability for our city. And what I mean by that is our reserve plan. I think that was very, very well thought out. We cannot ignore our obligations for the future. Councilmember Aguirre said it very well. We're trying not to put a load on the future of Redwood City. We're trying to help pay it down as we can. And I think you found the right balance. And I think one way you did that was by bringing all your department heads in and asking them to help you brainstorm. How can we do this, as well as provide enough money in our reserves so that we can make payments? So thank you, because I'm sure that took probably longer than anything, trying to find the right balance of what to use in our reserves. And other than that, I do support the overall strategy for the development of the budget, including the proposed timeline. I was going to ask you if you could remind everybody of the upcoming dates that we will be having future either study sessions or council meetings in discussing budget. Just to remind them, if we have a slide, maybe we could even put it up there on the screen. But again, I want to thank our staff. I think we've got the best, and I really can't thank them enough for all the work, the hard work they've had in putting this budget together, especially during this difficult year and this difficult time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And actually, Jessica, if you could go back one slide, that's the best visual for the next steps. And so on April 26th, we'll have study sessions related both to federal grants that we receive as well as the capital improvement program. So that'll be another riveting night of financial information. And then in June, the budget will be presented on the 14th, hoping for adoption on the 28th.
Thank you very much.
And so then if we could go to the last slide for the proposed motions, please.
And I'd like to ask our city attorney, is this something that could be approved with one motion, or do they need to be taken separately?
Thank you, Mayor. As the council wishes, you can do it all in one motion or take them separately as you wish.
Okay, then I'll ask our council who would like to entertain a motion at this time.
I'd like to move all those recommendations listed. Ready?
And I'll second it, Hale.
Councilmember Reddy made the motion. Vice Mayor Hale seconded that motion to accept all 4 of the recommendations. Could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, we'll start with Councilmember Reddy. Councilmember Reddy?
Yes, I'm sorry. I couldn't unmute myself.
No problem. Thank you. Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Aguirre?
Yes.
Councilmember Espinosa Garnica?
Yes.
Councilmember G?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hale?
Yes.
And Mayor Howard?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, moving on to item number 9. City Council Committee Reports, the Governance Subcommittee, and I'll give that report. Here we go. In preparation for the upcoming City Council district election redistricting process, the Governance Committee interviewed 2 redistricting demographers to assist the city with the redistricting process. The committee recommended entering into a contract with redistricting partners. The agreement will come before the full City Council for recommended approval at the March 8th City Council meeting. The Governance Committee will meet in March to discuss redistricting, process options, and timelines once the demographer is on board. The full City Council is scheduled to discuss the redistricting process at the April 26th City Council meeting. Then I think the next thing would be the formation of the Harborview Ad Hoc Committee. We're forming a new ad hoc committee to be composed of Vice Mayor Hale, Council Member Smith, and myself. The committee will provide guidance to city staff in the negotiation of a development agreement between the city and the J. Paul Company, with an ultimate recommendation to be presented to the full council. Would anyone else have any city council interest or reports to report out on?
Mayor, may I just add a few things?
Councilmember Aguirre?
I just want to thank Councilmember G for the Lunar New Year celebration that we had last Saturday. It takes a lot of work to put something together like this and to be able to celebrate our community at a time of COVID in such a beautiful and respectful way. I just want to thank him and everyone that participated. And I want to bring attention to the deaths that have occurred on Woodside and in our community. And I want to make sure that we are moving forward and working with Caltrans on it. I know it's a concern in our community, and any death in our community is a tragedy. So I want to make sure that we continue to monitor that and work as quickly as we can. I know Councilmember G was going to work on that as well. It isn't an easy problem to solve, but it's one that we must.
Thank you, Councilmember Aguirre. And my thanks to Councilmember G for the virtual Lunar New Year Festival. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that. That was really very, very wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone
Thank you, Mayor
else?
Howard.
You're welcome. Councilmember Reddy?
Thank you, Mayor. Since we aren't as late as usual, I'd just like to briefly mention that I attended today CCAG's subcommittee of the Congestion Management and Environmental Quality Committee. And I am pleased to report that the San Mateo County is receiving approximately $4 million from MTC for its safe and seamless mobility quick strike program. And Redwood City was among those that is being recommended for payment to be one of the lucky projects that is being supported. And it's the Roosevelt Avenue Quick Build Traffic Calming Project. And I did send this to council members earlier, but I did want to just make a brief comment that what would help this project be successful would be letters of support. So if there are members of the community that would like to see this come to fruition, letters of support would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Reddy. Vice Mayor Hale?
I just wanted to inquire if that's the sort of thing the council could send a letter of support for as well.
That's a great question.
I had the impression that it wasn't so much council, but the staff would, staff sending a letter. But I think that's a good idea for the council to send a letter. CCAG staff specifically said that the project staff from the city, a letter from them, and community support would be valued. But I agree with you. I think a letter from council would be a good idea.
And I'd like to ask Ms. Diaz, if we could ask whoever is in charge at this time of our neighborhood associations, if he or she could be in touch with the Roosevelt Neighborhood Association and let them know that that kind of letter from individuals or as the association as a whole would really be very much appreciated, and to get them that information.
Sure, we could certainly do that. And Alex Kojikian still oversees community engagement. So.
Thank you very much. Oh, I saw our city attorney, but now I don't. Okay. Are there any other comments to be made? And if not, we'll move on to the city manager update. Melissa, you're on mute.
I made it to 10 o'clock, but thank you. So a couple of updates related to COVID-19. First, just wanted to make sure residents knew that the county has expanded vaccinations to teachers, child care providers, first responders, and food and agricultural workers who are eligible under the state's Phase 1B program. So as supply allows, people in all those categories can be vaccinated. And residents can go to smchealth.org to sign up on the county's notification tool so that they can be directly notified. And there's also a link there to the state notification system, My Turn. So both great ways to learn about when you're ready and available to be able to receive vaccine. As of February 17th, over 10,570 Redwood City individuals have been vaccinated. And throughout the county, it's over 116,000 individuals have been vaccinated. Roughly half of those age 75 and older have been vaccinated. So good progress there. And based on feedback that data that the county was experiencing as of last week, we may be able to announce later this week that the county could move into the less restrictive red tier by Wednesday potentially. So look for an announcement there that would allow indoor dining with modifications, increased indoor retail capacity, and additional activities with restrictions. And then two last things I'd like to highlight related to seniors in our community. The first is that there is free drive-through blood pressure screening that's available at the Veterans Memorial Senior Center in partnership with Dignity Health, Sequoia Hospital. That's at the first Tuesday of every month from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And additionally, wanted to let folks know that the AARP is providing tax preparation services for seniors. And there is contact-free assistance for taxpayers. And we can provide assistance by email, phone, or video calls. And potentially starting in March, we're hoping to be able to provide low-contact tax preparation service by appointment. And that's my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Diaz. Well, as we adjourn, I just would like to say that my hope is that everyone in Redwood City, that you and your families, please stay healthy and safe and have a good evening. Take care and thank you for being with us.